You ever play charades, and you can imagine it's like the pencil sharpener movement.
MovieChatz?
That's what's happening this time. We're gonna make you guess which movies we're talking about. 3 words. First word. No.
Sorry, I think I cut off the first
3 words.
1 second of what you said. So just give the spiel again.
Hello and welcome to Chatz, a movie podcast. You ever play charades or you try to get people to guess if it's a movie? And then, sorry, I gotta scroll down in the script. It's like a pencil sharpener movement. I should have memorized it. I'm sorry. It's really
fuck. I'm sorry. Unprofessional. I shouldn't be
That's
here.
my
I'm
bad.
so sorry.
But anyway, hey, welcome. It's a star-studded red carpet event here at Chatz. We are all of the most famous listeners have it in their ears today. You'll hear all their names at the end of the episode when we thank our wonderful listeners. No, but hey, normally on the main feed we're talking about television. We're taking it to the big screen. Although a lot of these movies I watched on a smaller screen than a television.
Me too.
Apologies to David Lynch, R.I.P.
R.I.P.
Your fucking cell phone.
The best part of that clip is that he says, "I forgot a fucking telephone." That's the best part.
Telephone. That's what it was. That's right.
I didn't mean to correct you, but I just think it's funnier the way he actually says it.
It is funnier that way. Yeah. Oh my gosh, I forgot to introduce you. So I'm Magellan. I'm joined by someone who, fuck, I should have written this down. Okay, here's how I'll do it. I'm Magellan, and we're two best friends.
There it is.
It's Alan.
Hello, everyone. It's me, the Glinda to Magellan's. Nope, the alphabet to Magellan's Glinda. Get it right! Not my tempo! That's an Oscar movie.
That's interesting. Who's the... I'll be Glinda.
It depends on the day. That depends
yeah, it
on
does.
the day. Little Fen Lily. Yeah, it really depends. I think the previous time we talked about it when I was like wearing green on an old video episode, it was like, well, I'm obviously Alphaba. But I think I have definitely been the Glinda in the relationship before. And, all the Chatz listeners who have been clamoring for a Wicked podcast, this is as close as you're actually going to get, I think.
Yeah.
We will be talking, and we'll be talking more about Wicked tonight, for sure. So.
We will. So if you're listening to this episode on the day of its release, it is March 2nd, 2025, which is the day of the 97th Academy Awards ceremony. So what we're going to be doing today in sort of a new thing we're doing on the feed, where sometimes we'll do different kinds of episodes that anybody could listen to. You don't have to be watching our show with us, although usually we're watching Xena Warrior Princess these days, and you should join us for that. But we'll be talking about the 97th Academy Awards. Specifically, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the nominees for Best Picture for this year and the ones that we've seen, what we think about them, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But to orient us to that conversation, I think, Alan, maybe we could first kind of give some background for both of us on, how much of an Oscar watcher we are. I know some people, it's a thing they do every year. They try to watch all of them, try to catch them in theaters even. For some people, they don't really follow that sort of thing. Where do you land on that spectrum of engaging with the Oscars, the films, the ceremony itself?
Yeah. It's cool because I've only really strongly engaged with the Oscars in the past 2 years. I think last year was my first real. I host an Oscar party, and now I say every year because last year went so perfectly well that I was like, I got to do this annually. And for me, it's as with
annual. Here we go.
Second annual. Yeah. Oh yeah, we talked about that. For me, it's always about the gathering of people together to watch the thing, right? Like when I was younger, I'd hear about the Oscars, and I'm like, it's so boring. And like I knew about the Moonlight fiasco, when the Moonlight winning Best Picture, despite it being announced incorrectly. I've known all the memes, right? Was the Oscars where the slap happened? The Will Smith slap? Is that at the Oscars?
Oh, maybe.
Yeah, that might. Oh yeah, it is 94th Academy Awards in 2022. So I just missed that one. So
That was 3 years ago?
yeah,
What the hell?
time is a
Oh,
flat
no.
circle. Uh,
Oh, no.
and so I'd hear all about that stuff, and I'd be like, oh man, maybe I wish I kind of watched it. I genuinely think that incident made me go like, should I? I wish I caught that live. Like that's like interesting cultural moment. It's problematic for sure, but I'm curious about it. And then I got to give it up to Magellan is clearly in a Wikipedia hole. I can see it in his eyes, guys.
So sorry. I was reading about the controversy of Shakespeare in Love winning over Saving Private Ryan.
Oh boy,
Uh, it's a thing.
that's a
It's
whole
on
thing.
the Wikipedia page for Best Picture, the Best Picture award. Go ahead.
Yes. I got to give shout outs to the Austin Danger podcast. I think they're a film
Mhm.
podcast, the only film podcast I listen to anymore. And they do the Austin Awards to coincide with the Oscars called the Stanies. Austin Awards, Stanies. And it's also gross to see hear Kevin say Stanies every year.
Mhm.
And what they do is they make a Google Doc or Google form every year, and people can vote. But what their awards are structured differently than the Oscars. It's like these are movies that we think actually should, or these are we think best actor should
Mhm.
have been. So it's kind of their
Mhm.
idealized version. It includes obviously the stuff that's actually nominated, but it's a mix. It has write-ins,
Mhm.
and so it's become this community thing with the Austin Danger podcast community, and they also talk about the Oscars a little bit. And I think just part of all of that and having a lot of free time last winter, I was like,
Mhm.
yeah, what if I just like threw on all of them? They're all accessible. Like this is the thing about cinema. They're all relatively accessible. We can talk about the pros and cons, accessibility issues with modern cinema. You know, some of these you
Mhm.
still have to watch in a theater. Some of these you cannot watch. They haven't had like proper, or not legally at least. Sorry, let's always be clear about that.
Mhm.
Distribution rights are hard. Some things get on streaming services. Some things are prohibitively expensive to watch. So I do my best. It feels good to check all 10 of them off. I have a coworker I talk about it with. And then, yeah, it all comes down to Oscar night where I have people over, we make snacks, we play Oscar bingo. There are lots of websites online that make Oscar bingo,
Mhm.
and we have a gay old time. It's fun to laugh at. It's a spectacle.
Mhm.
And it's a reason to watch movies in a season of the year when you're inside a lot and you kind of just want something to do. So for me, it
Mhm.
really fits nicely into this like January to February chunk of like I'm gonna watch 10 movies at some point in the next 2 months.
Yeah. Did you watch all of them for last year's? You
I
got to
did.
all 10?
I did.
What was your what was your best picture last year?
Let me look at the noms again.
Was it Oppenheimer?
No.
That's what won.
No. Yeah, it was what one. Not surprising. Nominees 2024. I loved a lot of them, man. Um, I think for me, the movie that like stuck with me the most was Past Lives. And this is
Mm.
the thing that's also fascinating about the Oscars is for those couple of months, these movies matter so much to you. You like think about them so much and the
Mhm.
controversies around them. But like I liked American Fiction quite a bit. I'm never gonna think about it again. But I went
Mhm.
to the effort to buy it and see it. I loved Anatomy of a Fall. I thought it was brilliant. But I think my personal best picture was Past Lives. Yeah.
Mm. Okay.
And I had my problems with some of the other picks, but like, yeah,
Mhm.
I saw all 10 of those. What about you?
Yeah.
What's your Oscar situation?
Um yeah, so I mean, I've been a lover of movies for a long time. My dad is a huge movies guy. Um aspiring screenwriter, so he would show me a lot of movies, and that was kind of like the way that that's the way that we hang out if I go to visit him, is we watch like 3 movies in a day
Yeah,
kinda thing.
amazing.
Um, but I've never been super on top of, like, let me check off all the Oscar nominees on the list. I don't know what it is. I think the way that I tend to watch movies or, like, choose movies to watch is it's more about, like, "Oh, this is one that I've heard over and over again is good," or "There's something about this particular movie, that speaks to me, and I know through osmosis things about it." So I like revisiting old Oscar movies or like, whatever, old
Mm-hmm.
classics. Um, and when I go to the movies, I feel like I'm usually going to see something screened, because it's like, oh, this is my chance to see this particular movie in a movie theater, that I won't get otherwise because
Correct.
it's not out right now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I've been getting back into going to the movies more often over the last year or two, and
I mean, you
this
live in one of the
I
greatest. Sorry, you live in one of the best cities in the world for going to the
hey,
movies.
it's a great town, New York, baby. It's a great movie town. Um, but yeah, for this podcast, it's the first time that I really made a concerted effort. Like, I'm gonna watch a bunch of the movies nominated for Best Picture and try to formulate an opinion on them. Um, I was trying to figure out when was the year prior to this where I saw like the most movies in a year's slate in that year, and it might have been 2017's movies. No, not even. I actually only saw 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri for that year, but that was a good movie.
Whoa! Did you see that with me?
No, I saw that movie
No.
by myself.
Oh,
It was awesome. It's a good movie.
amazing.
Anyway, yeah, but I've always been interested in the politics of it and the question of like, oh, the snubs and flubs and this movie should have won, but this one won and what the heck, or like this movie wasn't even nominated. Uh, I really enjoy the podcast. Oh my God, why am I forgetting the name of the podcast? Where they rank stuff, they pick the best of things. Help
Uh,
me out here. They have like a
yeah.
category.
Yep. It's trial by content.
Trial by content, yeah. And they have episodes like what's the best picture year, or what is the biggest snub in Oscars history is some of their episodes. So I like those kind of conversations. Um, and I think there's some of that talk to be had here, but um, this is the first year that I am like a little more on top of it because we're talking about it for the podcast. And of the 6 out of the 10 that I watched, 4 of them I watched in like the last couple days.
Yeah.
So yeah. But I'm excited to talk about them. But we were kind of talking the other day, we were texting about this, you know, this question of like, okay, when you're thinking about the Oscars and the best picture category, um, what movies end up getting like put on the list and how you make that determination of which one is actually the best. Do you want to share a little bit about that conversation we were having and some of the thoughts you're having about like what does it mean for something to be a best picture or nominated for best picture?
Yeah, absolutely. I also had this conversation in the Chatz Discord, which I highly recommend people join if they're interested in our wonderful community of nerds. We watch
Mhm.
Doctor Who in there, and also we talk about movies a lot. We have a listener of the podcast, Pat, especially, is frequently initiating people to talk about films in there and get your reviews on Letterboxd and whatnot. Uh, and someone was saying like, "Oh, this movie seems good, but it doesn't seem like an Oscar movie." And I was like, well, what do you mean by that, right? Like, I like to push back when people
Right.
say things like that, because I have like I mentioned to my coworker who watches a bunch of these too, and she loves talking about them, and she's
Mhm.
very firmly like, some of these movies don't need to be nominated, like
Mm.
Dune 2 doesn't feel like it needs to be nominated, or like Anora is a questionable nomination choice, and I'm like, well, what are you saying when you say that? Because to me, and this is my sort of thesis on the point, um, the Best Picture nominees represent
Mhm.
a general, broad sampling of what cinema was about in the year that we're nominating films. Like, what
Mhm.
is cinema about?
Mhm.
What is the general thesis? So, like for this year, for example, I think the biggest overarching thesis of as many of the films as I can contain is this sort of corruption of the American dream, the ideal, and how
Mm.
it clashes with reality, and how
Mm.
you want certain things and you have strong desires for them, but the work it takes to get them, uh, there's a tension
Mm.
there. And
Mhm.
like, you can English class a theme for any year's Best Picture nominees, and then maybe see what that says about society. I think in
Mhm.
general, America's like pretty. We're worn out right now. It's a weird year, especially for Hollywood, who are the people that make these determinations. Um, and we're looking for films that are about people saying like, "Can I do any better than what I have right now, or does the
Mm.
system just hate me?" So like,
Mm.
when I see these different swaths of films in there, I'm like, yeah, because they all fit the general theme, and that's the thing about them switching to 10 nominees, is they include popular stuff on purpose because it encourages people to watch the Oscars. Like, people made such a stink last year about Barbie. Why is Barbie in the same conversation as Oppenheimer besides the memes? And it's like, well, first of all, Barbie had a lot to say about like the state of modern feminism. And they're doing that on purpose, right? They pick popular movies not because they're going to win. This is, I think, where it rubs people the wrong way very often is they're like, well, why would you ever even nominate that if it has no shot of winning? And it's like, it's not about winning. When people say it's a pleasure to be nominated, they do mean it. It does provide extremely good press for your film and for your production company to be Best Picture nominated. That's an incredible honor. So I think a lot of these films like fit into certain blocks of like, they cover this audience, they cover this demographic of person. And that's kind of a vague answer to say like, they're painting with a broad brush. That's what I think makes Best Picture nominees. They fit generally under the theme, but they're mostly to paint with a broad brush, so that everybody has a movie that they're rooting for. Every demographic is like, this is the movie I'm putting my chips behind. That's how I feel about it. I'm curious how you feel about it.
Yeah, I I think I want to kind of walk backwards through some of the things that you said there. Because I totally agree. When I was watching these movies, I had this question about, the slate was expanded to 10 movies for the Oscars that were recognizing movies released in 2009.
Yeah.
And the reason that happened is because people were like, I think it was The Dark Knight, and there was like a Pixar movie, but I forget which one. And people were like, why weren't these movies nominated for Best Picture? What the heck? They should have been nominated. So the Academy expands it to 10. But it feels like, that there's almost like a bigger gap between not being nominated and being nominated in terms of the prestige that imparts on a film, as opposed to the gap between being nominated and winning.
Exactly.
And I feel like often for some movies, them winning there's a bit of a stigma to it, because then there's like this increased scrutiny of, oh, well, did you deserve to win? I don't know about that.
Exactly.
Compared to these other movies. But that makes it kind of interesting, because then it's sort of like, well, what's the project here? Like, why is there even a Best Picture?
It makes good TV.
Right, exactly. Like, ultimately it's an entertainment product, and it is, people want to win it, I guess. Like, if you're making movies, maybe you care about that sort of thing. But yeah, there are definitely films that get put on the slate of movies that get nominated where it's like, well, that's not going to win. Like Dune Part 2 is not going to win Best Picture. So then it's like, does it do something for us as moviegoers, or people like me who would go back and look at old lists of Best Picture nominees to find things to watch? There's something about like what that does for a film's legacy that has value. And then I don't know, I was feeling very conflicted about, do I think it's a good thing that there's 10 nominees? Like, I guess, because it widens the pool, but it also kind of, I think, more so exposes the flaws of even trying to figure this out in the first place, of like, well, how do you, when you include 10 different movies that are this different in the ways that they operate or what they're trying to accomplish, then like you simply can't pick which one is the best. It's like it's an impossible
fool's errand
task. Yeah.
And there's something fun too, man, about, sorry, just briefly on that point. You said Dune 2 is not going to win Best Picture, but the fact that it's nominated means like it could. We genuinely don't know. I think if you use logic and you follow trends of like how the Academy picks winners, like, no, it's not going to win. But there is, because it was nominated, that little tingle of like almost a gamble, right? People do gamble on the Oscars. People bet on the Oscars. I mean, it's like, it could be a dark horse. They've had the weirdest dark horses in the past. I mean, like Slumdog Millionaire was 2009 pick. I don't think that movie's
Mhm.
incredible, but do I think that movie says something about 2009? Yeah, kind of. I think the
Mhm.
economic crisis. And so you talk about legacy, and like there being one winner means that years from now, when some film buff or some historian is like, let's look at the films of that year, that is one
Mhm.
data point that they can look at. If you're like, I'm going to watch all 10 of the movies that were nominated in 2013, like that, no one's doing that anymore. Those movies
Mm.
fade out of existence outside of the couple months before the Oscars. But the best
Mhm.
picture stands the test of time. People think about it, people Google it and go, what was the best picture from 1984? Oh, this? Okay, I'm curious about that. So I think that's also the
Yeah,
point of
but
like winning best picture.
that's true. And I think there are some cases where the best picture itself fades because people kind of end up agreeing on what the best picture was supposed to be.
Yes.
And then they're like, "Wait a minute, that one didn't win," or like, "That one was nominated," which I think is an
Yeah,
interesting
the snubs.
the snubs, yeah. Um, and, ultimately, I guess it is good that we have the wider pool because on Trial by Content, one of the films that they were pointing out as, like, one of the clear biggest snubs from the 1989, films
Mm.
Oscars was Do the Right Thing. It was
Oh
not
wow.
nominated. The movie that won that year was Driving Miss Daisy.
Bruh.
So,
Bruh.
yeah, so it's a bro moment for the Academy.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but, to then kind of proceed further into the points that you made, it's interesting for, when I heard you say that your coworker had this belief about, like, the Oscariness of movies.
Yeah.
It That is fascinating to me because, I mean, we know something being Oscar bait it's a cliche,
Yeah.
and you can spot an Oscar bait film. It's like a biopic that's kinda dramatic and historical, but the whole family could watch it. Like, The King's Speech, I think, is a good example
Classic Oscar bait. Yes.
of an Oscar bait Best Picture winner. Um, and when you look at the winners from the last 10 years, I think that there's been an attempt to try to challenge that and make strategic picks to go against type a little bit. But you always see nominees that are like, The Brutalist or A Complete Unknown, where
Yeah.
it's like, okay, this is an Oscars ass movie
Big
right
time.
here. Um,
It's movies that are they are nakedly less about the subject and more about making a movie about the subject. So
right.
like a lot of people say this, and the truth is like this term has warped a lot. People a lot of times will say like Oscar bait is movies that I don't like. It's movies that I don't think are cool. But like Jojo Rabbit is about has Nazis in it. That's why it gets nominated, right?
Mm,
It's probably a good film. I know people who really like it, but I don't think of it as one of those. The Blind Side, perfect example of like, oh, they
yes.
made this to be sentimental.
Yes.
Hidden Figures, movies about racism, movies about sad African American people tend to do really well at the Oscars because Hollywood is a very white industry, and it makes them feel like they're back padding to have nominated and potentially give awards to those
Mhm.
filmmakers. And I'm
Yeah.
not saying like they shouldn't do that. I just think you can tell sometimes with a movie
Yeah, it
like
just always feels like they're doing that. Yeah.
yes, yeah. And like yeah, Slumdog Millionaire best example to me. Like British director, Indian kid going across the world, beautiful cinematography. It's about the dream of like financial ascent, all this stuff.
Mhm.
It's all there. It practically feels engineered to be an Oscar movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm l the most to me, like, the example of what I don't like about this selection process and the movies that end up getting nominated and then what gets picked out of them is the movies from 2018,
Ooh,
because this is the list of what was nominated and didn't win.
okay.
Black Panther, Black Klansman, Bohemian Rhapsody, The Favorite, Roma,
Wow.
A Star Is Born, and Vice, which is the Dick Cheney movie.
Oh my
The winner that
god.
year was Green Book.
Oh my god. Filthy year.
You see what I'm saying? Like, that year is a
Yeah.
perfect encapsulation of, we're gonna have, like, a few movies about race and some that are a little more radical, but we're gonna give the win to like the safest one where a white person is the hero. Also, we have a music biopic.
Mm-hmm.
Also, we have kind of a political biopic about a recent figure. We got the kind of star power romantic Star is Born movie. We've got the weird one for the freaks, The Favorite, which is a great movie.
Hell yeah.
Roma for that sad foreign language film. Like we did it. It's all in
Mm-hmm.
there. And yeah, it just feels a little bit cynical. But then also, I don't know, like, how are you supposed to do this? I get maybe there's not a right way to make these picks, but
And this is why they have different nominees, right? So that's a year where they
yeah.
can still give best supporting to Olivia Colman for The Favorite, because like they can
Mhm.
acknowledge like there was things about this movie that are objectively very good. I think she's either best. I don't think she was best actress. I think best supporting. Apologies if I'm misremembering.
Mhm.
But like that's why
I
you have
get it.
other awards, is so that people can be like, oh, you got something. We gave you an Oscar.
Mhm.
And for actors, that can give them a lot of clout getting roles as well. So there's like a more of a project to getting the other awards at the Oscars.
Yeah. Um, all that being said, we are going to discuss the Best Picture nominees and maybe pick one, because that's a fun task to do.
Yeah, at
And I
least
I
talk.
think that
Yeah,
that's, like, why they do this, right? As much as
correct.
I'm kind of casting doubt on it, it's fun. We're having a good time at the movies.
There it is.
Yeah. So we're gonna do that. Before we dive into the best pictures, we could talk about any other movies that aren't on the best picture list but are up for other awards that we
Yeah,
saw. Um, so you said you watched Flow. I'm curious about Flow.
yeah. I friend of the podcast, Jim, who was on our Patreon pod recently. Him and his partner Samantha came over last weekend, and I was like, oh, they're coming to my Oscar party. So I'm like, let's knock out a best picture nom. I got you guys here. Let's do something. And I wanted to put on Nickel Boys. I showed them the trailer. They were like, this looks really cool. It is 2.5 hours long, and it is 10 o'clock at night. We can't do it. We're going to fall asleep. We're going to collectively fall asleep. So I'm like, all right, well, what's something shorter? And they're both big cat people. So I was like, you guys heard about this movie about a cat? And it's a best animated picture. I always tell myself every year when they do best animated, I go, I should have watched more of those. Or like best short film. Those are all even more available online and so quick to watch. And I never watch them. I always feel
Mhm.
bad about it. So we put on Flow, and it's a really interesting little thing. I think with best animated,
Mhm.
your criteria for what makes it best is very different, because it's like, well, how's it pushing the medium of animation forward, not just film? But
Mhm. Mhm.
so Flow, for the general public, it's a movie about a cat who is existing in a sort of antediluvian world. Like the biggest flood of society has
Mhm.
happened, and this cat is just trying to survive. It bums around different houses, and it finds a crew of different animals, mainly like dogs and a capybara and a few other various creatures. And they get on a boat, and they kind of travel around trying to get somewhere safe, and they deal with surviving a flood. It is really beautiful. It has a sort of low fidelity style to it, almost reminiscent of like a PS1 game, but in a really
Mhm.
good way. Like I think the PS1 aesthetic has really come back in a major way. But the thing about I mean that, and the thing about Flow is like every disparate element of it feels like it's a different visual quality. Like the characters look like they're from a PS1 game. The water looks like it's real, and then the environments look like they're painted. And all
Mhm.
of that does generally work. My only thing was like it is a film with no dialogue. None of the animals speak. They're not talking animals. Um, but it's very expressive. If you're a cat owner, I've been told that this movie has some really great, just like cat animation. He's kneading,
Mhm.
he's plucking at carpets, he jumps and like makes his eyes at certain things in funny ways, he eats in certain ways. Um, I think it's all like if you want to see how animals can be animated in really creative ways, and also it's a nonverbal story about environmental collapse and how people find community
Mhm.
post climate disaster. I think it does actually have a shot at best animated. I know it's up against like some pretty intense competition. Uh Inside Out 2, Memoir of a Snail, Wallace and Gromit, Vengeance Most Foul, and The Wild Robot.
Mhm.
Among the rest of those, I really want to watch The Wild Robot. My friends who saw it said it was awesome. That's another like people existing or like creatures existing at the end of the world kind of story.
Mm.
And then Wallace and Gromit has like never won, and I don't think has ever won Oscars. They feel like they're due for art and animation's like due for it.
It's like Leonardo DiCaprio winning for The Revenant or whatever.
Yeah, like so they might just get it, you know, like just give them that. That movie's on Netflix. I kind of want to watch it. I didn't used to like Wallace and Gromit, but yeah, I don't know. Or maybe Pixar really did just like put enough money into the Oscar bucket, and they're gonna give it to Inside Out 2 to be cool because it has a character called Anxiety. Ugh, I'm not thrilled about potentially having to see Inside Out 2. No thanks. I liked the first one. I owned the first one, but I'm good. So I really liked Flow. I think it actually does have an earnest shot. I'd be really happy if it wins. The fun thing about watching one nominee is you can be like, that's my GOAT right there. I don't care about the rest.
It's like picking a sports team.
Yes.
You're just kind of rooting for the home team.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's the only...
That's been the way that I've engaged with Best Picture for the last decade is like, well,
I saw this
only seen 3 billboards outside Ebbing, Missouri, and that was pretty good. So
I'm all good. Exactly.
Yeah. That's funny.
Did you watch any other non-Oscar or non-Best Pictures?
Yeah, there's one that I watched that's up for other awards. I tried to see if I could cram in Gladiator 2, but I didn't find the time. But How the Mighty Have Fallen, because Gladiator was a Best Picture.
True.
Gladiator 1.
Yeah.
And now they're just getting costume nominations, but they do look like good costumes. But I saw, it's called A Real Pain.
Yeah.
It's that movie. Jesse Eisenberg wrote, directed, stars in it. And then Kieran Culkin is in it. And it's up for Kieran Culkin as Best Supporting Actor, and it's up for Best Original Screenplay. It's a really sweet movie. It's the best way I can describe it is if movies had Pokemon types, this movie would be Sideways type.
Oh.
Like
it just took me on such a journey to understand that. I fully get it. I fully do get what you said there.
It's a movie about 2 guys who kind of are annoyed about each other.
Yeah.
But they're on a trip together and they got to figure it out. And that's just you put 2 really good actors in there. You make a really grounded script that is funny and naturalistic. And it works. And the plot, I think, also is a really it also opens it up for you to analyze it from different lenses and examine the world outside of these 2 characters, because essentially Jesse Eisenberg and Kieran Culkin play cousins who used to be really close when they were younger, and their grandmother has recently passed away. So they're going on this trip where it's kind of like a heritage trip in Poland, and they're Jewish. Their grandmother escaped the Holocaust and came to the U.S. And so they're going to Poland to see like where she grew up.
Wow.
They're in like a tour group of people who are also Jewish and on this same trip. And there's these really interesting dynamics with them and the other members of the tour who have varying relationships to Judaism. The guy leading the tour isn't Jewish. He's just like interested. And he's kind of the classic, like, let me be really respectful, but also like, I'm just interested in this. And you're like, oh, you're doing your best, but it's weird. And, and Jesse Eisenberg is kind of doing his like, I'm nervous and resentful of everybody thing. And Kieran Culkin is doing his like, I'm really charismatic, but now I'm really volatile, but now I'm sad. So it's great. I think it's a really sweet, tender movie. And you don't often get like a cousins movie.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
It's underexplored. Like the way in the kind of, I think, trope language of film, their relationship feels like a sibling relationship, and they're definitely great sibling movies. But when you make it cousins, you can make their relationship about different things that are like a little more distant from the immediate nuclear nature of like the home they grew up in, and instead it's about heritage, it's about their family in a much broader way. That's really cool. So I'd recommend it. It's a quick watch, and I teared up at the end. It's a nice one.
That is in the Oscar category for me of best film I would watch with my dad. Like he would,
Yeah.
my dad. I don't actually think he would like that particular film, but the way you describe it, like it's about people, it's about family. I think he would. That would be catnip to my dad, and me too. I
And
really
it's
want to watch it.
and it's about like the experience of immigration for
Yeah.
people at different generations as they relate to when the family immigrated, because
Uh,
both of them are third generation, and they talk about that in the movie. Like Jesse Eisenberg's character kind of talks about like what it feels like to be a third generation Polish Jewish immigrant, and like now you're living basically a pretty comfortable life, and it's like, what the fuck, like this feels fucked up, and I feel like I'm doing something wrong.
yeah.
um so
You owe
it's
something
cool.
to your ancestors in a way, but you can't repay that.
Yeah, yeah. So it's good. It's a sweet movie. It's not it makes sense that it wasn't nominated for best picture necessarily, but yeah, it's a sideways type, you
Yeah.
know.
I really want to
Sideways
watch
type.
it. That's on the list. Is it streamable somewhere easy?
Yeah, that's part of the reason I watched it, because I was like, I don't want to pay $20 to watch a bunch of these other movies. Oh, I can just go
Yeah.
to Hulu and watch this one. So
Perfect.
I did. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. Accessibility,
Okay,
man.
let's
Let's talk
talk.
about it when we get to the best pictures. Yeah, let's go.
So let's talk about the real beef, the meat and potatoes here, which is our 10 Best Picture nominees. Um, and so I'll list the nominees. I'll say some things because you were saying themes you noticed between them, and I had some thoughts about that. And then
Mhm.
we'll kind of talk about which ones we watched and how we want to tackle this. So the 10 are Anora, The Brutalist, A Complete Unknown, Conclave, Dune Part 2, Emilia Perez, I'm Still Here, Nickel Boys, The Substance, and Wicked. And I liked what you were saying before. These are 10 movies that are about hope in uh like a kind of meta way, looking at the concept of how does it feel to hope for something, and what does it look like when that hope isn't realized or it's more complicated than you expected it to be.
Yeah.
And these movies resolve that in different ways and have varying degrees of cynicism or optimism about
Right.
hoping, which I think is really cool. Like even Dune Part 2 in a lot of ways is
Yeah.
about hope and has a very particular critique of hope.
Hmm.
I think these movies also, a lot of them are about like bodies and gender and kind of like the way that your body exists in a socio-political context, and what you do about that, like where is their agency
Right.
for you in that regard. Where does something feel like agency but it's not, or it's participating in the systems.
Hmm.
So I think that's really interesting. Um, and I think another thing that these movies have in common is it feels like some of the storytelling is somewhat episodic in a few of these.
Yeah.
Like it almost feels like we've gone through this phase in the transformation of television where it's become more movie like, and in some ways I feel like movies have become more TV like. um and I have more specific thoughts on specific movies in that sense, but those are
Yeah.
kind of the themes I noticed. Were there any other themes that you noticed besides what you were talking about before?
Women.
Yeah,
the, the
yeah.
treatment and the breaking down of women's bodies particularly, and also like what the word woman means in this modern day and
Mm-hmm.
age, the role of
Mm-hmm.
women in men's society as well, how they can be used as tools or sort of objects. Even the ones that I haven't seen, I'm aware are like touching on those
Right.
topics. um but also, yeah, generally like how we tell stories about ourselves too. What does the narrative say about us? I would say that especially applies to like Wicked and Nickel Boys. A wild
Mm.
thing to synthesize those two movies together is that they're both like when you grow up, when you leave the environment that built you, how do people talk about you? You know, what does your
Mm,
story become down the line? So I'm really interested in discussing that idea more, the
yeah,
storytelling theme.
very cool. Yeah, I think the toughest contest at these awards is Best Actress.
Yes.
I think that's the one that I would have the hardest time picking and predicting.
There are 5 nominees. There are really 4 nominees. So sorry. Because Carla Sofia Gascon, scandal noted, it's just not.
mm,
I have my thoughts on her online persona and how a lot of like really unfortunate stuff has been coming out about her. Um,
mm,
so I'm like,
bummer.
yeah, it really is. It's one of those like, I think we'll talk about it when we talk about Emilia Perez, but like,
Yeah.
uh, if you just stopped talking about it, people would be able to make their own opinions on your movie and about you, but you keep talking. And that's causing
Yeah.
problems. That's the thing about the modern social media age is like when you talk too much about yourself and about your opinions, people will like use that and make that into
Ugh.
their own narrative. It's really unfortunate. But yeah,
Yeah.
best actress
It's
though,
so
for
hard.
real.
It's so hard. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We'll talk about Emilia Perez. I have so many thoughts about that movie.
Please, let's get there. Yeah.
Um, okay. So shall we okay, let's say the ones that we watched. I watched 6 of them.
Yep. I
How many
watched
have you
7.
seen? 7? Okay,
7.
great. I think we saw all the same ones except you saw Nickel Boys and I
That's
did not see
correct.
Nickel Boys.
Mm-hmm.
So there are 3 that neither of us have seen. We've not seen The Brutalist. Uh, I I considered it. I considered going to the movies yesterday. I considered paying the $20 yesterday. Uh, but I just get the sense that it's one of those movies that it's probably pretty good, but in a way that I have seen before. Like I'm not getting the
Yeah.
sense that it's gonna offer me something super brand new. And I'm ready to be wrong. Like I
Right.
I think I still intend to watch it, but if it wins or Adrian Brody wins, it's kind of like, all right, whatever. Like the
It's
brutalist.
very Oscar-y. Yeah. I
Yeah.
want to, when I do see it eventually, I will go into it with an open mind. Part of the reason I haven't seen it yet is I keep getting home at like 8 from like life stuff,
Hmm.
and it's like, okay, this is like 3.5 hours long. Even with the
Hmm.
intermission, you were saying like you could just watch half and then watch the other half another time. I might do that, but
Hmm.
I feel like the best way for me to give this movie everything I've got is to go to a theater and like in an afternoon showing, fully, have
Hmm.
drank a coffee beforehand and just like lock in, because I really want
Hmm.
to give it a fair shake. I know people who love it; they say the ending's amazing, and then
Hmm.
but the thing is, I also know people who really hate it. Listener Jim and
Yeah, and
Samantha like despised this film.
yeah, and it's people who I share opinions with or I respect their opinions are split on this movie in a way where
Yeah.
it's like, okay, I don't know,
Like if there
not
was momentum
sure.
behind it across the board, I'd be like, okay, I'll make it. I'll make the time. But like there
Yeah, right.
isn't. There isn't across the board for us, at least in our communities. I will
Yeah,
watch it though. I promise.
yeah. So I think this one to me, I had this distinction when I was thinking about these movies between when you're picking a best picture, what's the rubric? What are the criteria that you're using?
Yeah.
And in my head, there's kind of a difference between like, well, are you picking the best picture or the most best picture?
Yeah.
And The Brutalist feels the sense I get is it's the most best picture. Maybe Amelia Perez is the most best picture. Amelia Perez has the most nominations of any of these movies, by the way. It has 13 nominations. Um,
I'm
the
mad.
Brutalist has 10 and something else has 10. I think Wicked has 10, but Wicked deserves all those because of all of its costuming and
Yeah.
other things. Um,
It's doing a
but The
lot of different
Brutalist and
things.
Amelia Perez have a ton. Complete Unknown has 8. It's like, what are we doing
What are we
here,
doing here,
guys?
guys? Okay. I will
And I
see,
think
guys. I
that's
promise.
yeah. I think that's maybe a good way to actually measure like most best picture is just what is getting the most nominations. And those are movies that I like have a bit of a distaste for or am suspicious of.
Yeah.
So The Brutalist is that. Neither of us have seen A Complete Unknown. I ranted about it at like on a bonus episode or something, just like the concept of its existence. I will watch it when it's free, when it costs me nothing but my time.
I think this week it's gonna hit Disney
Because
Plus. I think you'll be able to do that soon.
that'll be good. Because I enjoy Bob Dylan's music.
Yeah.
I enjoy Timothy Chalamet. You know, I think I was a hater when I hadn't seen him in anything, and they were like, "He's Willy Wonka. He's everything." Like, what the heck? But the more I see of that guy, the more I'm like, you know what? I like you, Timothy Chalamet, and he's kind of the MVP of these
Of the
Oscars. You know,
Oscars, yeah.
he's holding down 2 of the 10 Best Picture nominees.
He really has
Impressive.
become a presence in Hollywood that you kind of can't ignore for much longer. I just don't think he has had
Yeah.
like his like this is the best Timothy Chalamet performance I've ever seen movie.
Right.
You know,
Right.
I like him in things. I think he brings a good character to things, but like I've never been wowed, you know, by Timothy Chalamet. So
Yes.
that's my other thing. So like I will say my coworker, that one I aforementioned coworker, is fighting
Mhm.
really hard. She strongly believes that A Complete Unknown should be Best Picture, which comes back to like, what are you looking for out of Best Picture? Like, and I asked her, I know I don't come to her with cynicism. I come to her like, okay, honestly, like what is it that you find so enchanting? And she was like, it has a lot of like artists that I cared about when I was younger in it, and they're played by
Uh-huh.
actors that I like, and it's thought
Yep.
provoking. And she described the opening scene to me where it's like this random guy's going to jail for writing a song, and it's actually This Land Is Your Land. Isn't that crazy? And I was like, yeah, but that's just that's just history. Like that is what I think she's realized. And I really
Yeah.
don't want to come off as a hater to her because I think she's wonderful. But like, I think when you like a biopic, a lot of times what you're enjoying is like the fact that this is just real, not how they rendered it, but like the fact that
Mm.
it's
Mhm.
that thing happened, and that's cool that that happened.
Yeah, and I think that's the Green Book thing of like, is it that this movie was really something special, or is it that the Green Books were a thing, and this is
Right.
like a really interesting angle and lens to take on segregation and civil rights and resistance to it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it is like, well, is this rendering really all that great, or are we kind of awarding the award to like the thing that the
This
story is based on? And it's like, well, I'm glad we made a movie about this. We really should have.
my
Yeah.
yeah. My last 2 points are uh you know, I don't think I was listening to a Beautiful Anonymous episode where he talked to a musician recently, and the guy was like, Bob Dylan probably wouldn't. He was his whole brand was being like a lot of it was being anti-establishment, and like for
Right.
him to then okay a movie about himself, like to that person on the podcast was like, it feels like he's just an old man who's kind of like selling out his likeness. Like, guys, go ahead and make a movie about how I was rebellious. You know, it doesn't
Hmm.
feel like the project is, and this is why I think the music industry is fucked up. It's just like, you guys can make me look good, you know, make me look really cool and interesting. And they did that. And that's like flatly what they accomplished. It just doesn't feel like a movie that challenges, you know. And my other point was
Hmm.
the thing about people who we watch movies, we know about culture and movies and stuff, is we've seen so many biopics come out that people make parodies of them, and those parodies are old now. Like Walk Hard, the
Yes.
Dewey Cox story is from like 2007. And that movie is a
Hmm.
complete unknown. They're literally still doing it.
Well, and what's even funnier about that is the guy who wrote and directed Complete Unknown, James
James
Mangold,
Mangold.
wrote and directed Walk the Line in 2005.
The movie that
So,
Walk Hard's like directly parodying.
yeah, so his movie got completely roasted, and we were like, "Oh my god, these freaking Oscar bait like music biopics." And then this cat comes back like 10, 20 years later,
Bet I'll do it
and
again.
he does it again. He can't keep getting away with this.
Apparently he can. Apparently James Mangold can do whatever the hell he wants because
I
I
know
got
there's
it.
such an appetite for this, and it feels like
There
the
is.
way that these movies get greenlit is like, okay, well, it's this person's turn. Like that's what Bohemian Rhapsody felt like. Is like, well, you don't really have a. And to be fair, I watched that movie on a plane and I cried,
Yeah.
but I cried because I like Queen songs and I like Freddie Mercury,
Right.
and it's sad that he died.
Right.
Like that's
Again, the
what was
truth is the thing
moving
that's
me.
sad. Exactly.
Yes, but the rendering of it, it was very, very rote and lame. Okay.
Mangold has such an interesting filmography if you read about
Yes.
his stuff. Like
Mhm.
Ford versus Ferrari, also Oscar Beatty, and then Logan and the Wolverine movies. It's like, and then he worked on a TV. She produced on a TV show for a while. It's like, dog, what? You just take gigs, I guess. That's kind of cool.
Yeah,
The Indiana Jones movie. He did Dial of Destiny. Like, what are you doing?
This guy is a highly nominated director who I just never think about.
Yes.
Never do I think about this man. Like the 310 to Yuma remake was good. It was good Western. Like, I guess.
Yeah.
Whatever. So funny.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the third movie that neither of us saw was I'm Still Here, which I've heard good things, but I don't know much about it.
I've heard extremely good things. Kevin from Austin Danger was like, this movie's going to be worth your time if you get a chance to see it. I just, this is not a diss on him in the slightest. Kevin, come on Chatz, a television podcast, but like Kevin's from New York and also works for like a theater company. So he has like infinite access and time, and it's like his hobby. So he has infinite access and time to being able to see everything. So I get like a little tired of like filmy people like that being like, in 6 months, it's like the Chuck Berry thing in Back to the Future. Like, you guys are going to love, this is going to be your favorite movie in 6 months. I've already seen it. I can't talk about it for 6 months, but you'll love it. And I'm like, that's not selling. I'm not excited by that.
Yeah.
But, I want, people in Brazil are really putting a lot of like stake behind it. It feels like it's telling an important story about the politics in Brazil. It's got like the dictatorship in the 70s. Strong female lead performance. Fernanda Torres is nominated, if not going to win something. It seems like it's really good. I'm sad that I haven't watched it. I would love to watch it soon. I wish I knew more. I actually don't even want to know what I just want to go right into it. There's like tragedy, there's life stuff. It's going to be great.
Of the ones that I haven't seen, that and Nickel Boys, I know that I'm missing out on something.
Yeah.
Good.
I'll report back when I see that.
Yeah. Great. Okay, so should we go through the rest alphabetically and just kind of talk about how we feel about them?
Let's do it.
Okay, so first up here is Anora, which I was originally not gonna watch. I just hadn't prioritized it, but then I was like, you know what? This morning at like 7 a.m., I was like, I'm doing it. I'm watching Anora.
Yeah.
And that was a great choice. That was a very good choice on my part.
I'm so glad.
Me too. So Anora tells the story of Anora. She goes by Annie, who is an exotic dancer who lives in Brooklyn, and she meets the son of a wealthy Russian oligarch. They have a sort of whirlwind romance kind of situation.
Maybe. Yeah.
And then the way that the director describes this movie is it's 50 minutes of romantic comedy followed by 90 minutes of reality.
Oh, he's right.
And the way that people should have sold me on this movie if they were trying to, which nobody was really, is it's like this rapturous, like, oh my God, we're falling in love. And then it just smash cuts to a Coen Brothers movie. And it's awesome. It's a very good movie. What do you think of Anora?
I loved it. I really loved it. I got to watch this one with two buddies last week, and we were crying laughing for those first 50 minutes. And I knew one of them didn't even know that Vanya is the son of a Russian oligarch. He went into it like, what's this guy's job? He's got a crypto thing? Like the way they are in the movie where they're like, she asks him the first time in bed, she's like, do you you probably have a business, right? Like you sell something. And he's like, yeah, kind of. I have a business. That's not where I get my money from. So I loved watching that stuff unfurl. But yeah, I think the first 50 minutes or so of this movie are some of the funniest comedy stuff I've seen. And then it becomes Coen Brothers, but also Uncut Gems a little bit.
Yes. I agree.
Not as specifically stressful, but I think the best thing about Anora, because I know I have a lot of friends who didn't adore Anora because of its portrayal of the main character. And I think while she is wonderful, you think about it, a lot of this movie is like things happening to her and her making a decision, but then things happen at her. And it's like, even though this is about her, it doesn't feel like she has all of the agency in the world. But what really worked for me, I can only speak for myself, is that it's kind of like a movie where every scene that you would have watched in another one of these types of films cut, and they just kept showing it.
Yeah,
Like
right.
there's this incredible sequence in Vanya's like gigantic house or whatever, his condo,
Yeah.
where the gangsters come in and they're like, "Hey, we got to find him." I think we're gonna be talking like somewhat plot specifics in here. We don't need to go into
Yeah,
like
we're
deep
spoiling every
spoilers.
movie we talk about.
I'll put
So
the warning up top for folks. But yeah,
yeah,
we're
yeah.
to talk about the films, we have to talk about some plot stuff.
Yeah.
Uh and they like attack her and she's freaking out. That scene goes so long.
It's
It,
so good.
and it's
That scene is
amazing.
amazing.
And in general,
That's the
this
scene that the hinge between like kind of the
comedy to
two
serious.
films. Yeah, yeah, right.
And it's
I think it
every
gets funnier. I in some ways it gets or funny in a different way, but yeah.
it's funny in the absurdity of it. Like the poor guard who is clearly concussed from that point of the movie onward, and you're like, the movie encourages you to empathize with everybody involved,
Uh-huh.
right? It's like these are all people who are
Yep.
just doing a job. That's really the focus
Mhm.
of it. Like, except for Vanya, he's got his own fucking problems, piece of shit.
Mhm.
It's like
Mhm.
this guard like took a concussion and is complaining about it and should go to the hospital and is not being listened to the point where he's vomiting from his concussion. That's like so sad.
Mhm.
But it's like, but he's just one of those goons in a Russian mob movie. But you're like, oh, I feel
Mhm.
bad for you. And
Mhm.
then, who's the bald one? What is his name?
Igor.
Igor. My
Mhm.
sweet, beautiful Igor. My perfect boy. Who's the movie knows where you are looking with your eyes throughout
Yeah.
its runtime. You know, we're chasing Ivan around New York City. We're finding out where he is, but Igor's in the back the whole time. And you realize that this is the only man in this entire film who truly listens to Anora and like cares about her for his
Mhm.
own reasons. And he is just a guy who lives in the Russian borough of New York and like takes these kind of jobs, and it sucks, but he kind of has
Mhm.
he like develops feelings for her. So I just love that the movie is like all of those people in the background of a crime movie those are the characters that this is about. The ones who are on the
Mhm.
fringe, the sex worker, the Russian guard, the fucking priest who moonlights as a goon for an oligarch.
He has
Ah!
to leave the baptism. Yeah.
Ah!
So
That scene's
funny.
incredible. He has such uncle
Yeah.
energy. If you're the child of immigrants at all, you have an uncle who's like this,
Yeah.
who talks like him, who looks like him. Like it's astounding. And then yeah, I
Mhm.
think the back third of this movie is like really heartbreaking in some ways that like touched me. Like going from uproarious laughter to especially that final. We're gonna talk about that final shot, but like or that final 10
Mhm.
minutes. I was like,
Mhm.
you guys, because we kept joking, right? We're like, her and Igor, they got a thing going on. I wonder he should get with her at the end. And then for the movie to like play that out, I was like, oh,
Mhm.
oh my god.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the movie really is so masterful at knowing exactly, like you were saying, where you're looking and what you're thinking,
Yeah.
and then looking at you and being like, "Oh yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Well,
Here
let's
it is.
really think about that. Let's think about the ramifications of that. Let's really get into it." And something that I wrote in my notes about this is really the distinction between a movie being or a story being a comedy or a drama is just like where you put the ending.
Right. Where's the period?
Because you could have the whole first 50 minutes where Anora meets Vanya and they have this whirlwind romance, and he's like, "Oh, we're gonna get married." They get married in Vegas, and now we're gonna be happy together. And fuck my parents, they suck. You could end the
Yay.
movie, and it's like, "Yay, we did it." Um, you could go further, and now it's like, shit. Now we have to deal with actual real life ramifications of what if this happened.
Yeah.
And then you could end the movie in Nevada where they get an annulment, and it's like, okay, Honora, you're gonna get flown back to New York City. End the movie. Wow, that one's sad.
Yeah.
And then they keep going further after that, and it's like, wait, now it's kind of another rom-com where like both of these people, her and Igor, have gotten fucked over by the situation. And then they end that movie halfway through it, and you're like, fuck, well, this was actually really sad and confusing.
Yeah.
So I think that is so brilliant in some of that episodic storytelling that I was talking about.
Hmm.
But you know, it's funny to hear people talk about Anora as like not having agency in the plot of the film, because I think the reason that this felt like a Coen Brothers movie to me in part is because they as filmmakers are really interested in protagonists who just get fucked over by the world repeatedly. Like that
Yeah,
sort of Job story of, okay, well, what if you just had the worst day of your life where
exactly.
every terrible thing happened to you? This is like a serious man type of storytelling.
Right.
And the character's agency comes in the fact that they are trying to have agency is what makes a movie happen.
Right.
Honora could have just said like, "No, I don't want to get married," or she could have, uh, cooperated with the goons right away and been like, "Okay, whatever, fuck it." But the fact that she tries so hard to cling to the initial kind of hope and like princess fantasy, I'm gonna get taken out of my life into a new life. The fact that she wants to hold on to that so desperately and fights for it quite literally by like kicking that guy in the nose and screaming and telling people to go fuck themselves. She's the reason that the movie happens.
Right.
So like I can understand seeing someone who's in a disadvantaged, marginalized position getting fucked over, being like, "Oh, she doesn't have agency." But I disagree with that.
It's kind of about her
She
asserting her agency. Like, even if she doesn't
Yes,
get it, she still keeps trying to have it.
right. And I think it's important that like the movie's telling the story of like, well, you could try extremely hard to assert your agency, and the world is just going to then, in response to you, try harder to suppress you.
Right.
And what does that look like and feel like? And how do you hold on to some sense of self or purpose or your own goals in the face of that? And
Yeah.
she has a hard time figuring out how to do that. And she hasn't necessarily figured it out by the end of the movie. She's just kind of become aware of the fact that like that was a struggle that she was engaged in, and now she's like, I don't fucking know what to do next after this.
I don't know how to
um
assert myself
yeah.
anymore other than using, my body, which is why, to
Hmm.
me, that final scene, which feels like an epilogue of an epilogue, hits so hard for me. Is
Yeah.
like, okay, the world has told me that every time I try to leave my state of life into to have my Pretty Woman moment, that I can't have it,
Hmm.
and that it's fake, and that I'm being made fun of behind my back by people who never really loved me. All I can do is use my body. That's the only tool I have to assert dominance. And she's tired of it. And
Hmm.
she does it. She like, mounts Igor in the car as the windshield wipers are going, and she's like, I'm not, like, my personhood has been taken away. It's so
Hmm.
sad. It's profound. It feels like a private scene that I shouldn't have witnessed. I think that's why
Hmm.
that scene genuinely took my viewing party from like, we're laughing so much, we're making sex jokes, we're having a great time, to like, are you guys good? Like, whoa, that movie,
Hmm.
and like, as the credits fade, you still hear the windshield wiper just like going back and forth. I was like, that's really poetic.
Hmm.
Say what you will about this
Hmm.
movie and its goals and its aims and how Oscar it is, or is it too funny to be an Oscar movie, which I fundamentally disagree with. But like, it takes you on a journey and takes it to its natural conclusion, and I really respected it for that.
Yeah. I think, that last moment says so much about, really, this is a film about intimacy.
Yeah,
And the ways that that is related to and unrelated to sex. And because we see Honor at the beginning, in the strip club, and she's very good at making people feel comfortable, making them
she's very
feel
good at her
listened
job.
to. She's like a very personable person. Um, and I think she likes getting to know people and making them feel a form of intimacy that maybe she even feels like she feels, but it's from a safe distance.
Yeah,
Um, and then she allows herself to be like, okay, well, maybe I could have a more complete form of intimacy with this guy, Vanya, who is making her feel like that's what he wants. Um, and then the movie takes you through this kind of like class struggle, or this chapter that reveals the differences in class between them. And
Yeah.
then when you see Vanya again, it's like, oh, Anora is actually way more of like a pal with these goons than she is with this rich brat and his horrible rich parents. And she's had moments of intimacy with these guys who she's been cursing at and yelling at. Um, the scene where the four of them have dinner together in that
In the
diner, and
diner.
the Uncle Energy guy is like yelling at the kids who are making fun of him for not being on Instagram.
Love
And
that scene.
she's talking with Igor, and she's like, I want to get whatever that guy had. And he's like, okay, I can't afford that. And she's like, what the fuck? What are you talking
I
about?
want that. I said I want it.
Or like the moment where Igor restrains her and then ends up like holding her on his lap to keep her from getting away. And then the boss guy comes in, and he's like, what the fuck why is she on your lap? Like, what are you doing? And there is a kind of intimacy there that has this sort of coercive quality to it, but also a gentleness that then gets re-explored in that final moment. And uh I think the final moment isn't really saying like any definitive thing about Igor is coercive or Igor is gentle. He's both, and
Yeah.
Anora is both. And intimacy is really scary and hard and different from the fact that what she initiated was kind of like a almost like a exchange in the form of, thank you for helping me and getting this ring back, and in exchange, let's have sex. And then it becomes something different, and it's like, oh my god, this is a lot. So yeah, it's great. Like, this movie is really fucking good.
Yeah.
I liked it a lot.
I think there is still a subsect of people I can't recommend this to if you're like uncomfortable with depictions of sex work. But if you're that person, I kind of encourage you to like question why you feel that way a little bit. Because like if you're like, I don't want to watch Anora because there's too much sex. Like my friend who I saw it with was like, I almost saw this with my mom, and I'm so glad I didn't. It's not a movie to watch with your parents. It is probably a movie to watch either by yourself or with some friends who are your age, to just be like, ain't this fun? But like, yeah, think about why you don't want to see movies about sex workers. Because Pretty Woman was well lauded, but that movie doesn't have like explicit sex scenes in it because it was the 90s and we weren't comfortable with that. This movie is like, no, we're going to show that because even the way that people have sex is characterful. Like,
yes.
And it matters. People, there's so much discourse, and I don't want to get into this, about like the abundance of sex scenes in cinema, right? And like good movies don't have too many sex scenes in them. That's annoying. We don't need to see that anymore. But like, I think the fact that Vanya doesn't know how to take his time and is like a pump and dump kind of dude is characterful. Like, he doesn't know what intimacy looks like, so he fucks like he's watching porn, because he does. That's how he knows how sex is. She has to, after like 15 times of doing this, has to be like, if you slow down, you'll like it more. And he's like, what? Okay, I'll try that. Because he has never conceived of that, because he's never had an intimate relationship before.
Right.
I think that's important for people to see that.
Yeah.
That's my thought.
Yeah, totally agree. Okay, so the next one alphabetically that we both seen is Conclave.
Turtle time. Turtle power, baby. Let's go.
You recommended this one to me specifically.
Yes.
There's a lot of Italian, which is fun.
Yes.
There's a lot of
cameos,
rooms, politicking. There's some jump scare cameos. John Lithgow is here.
Stanley Tucci
is here. Isabella Rossellini is here. It's fun.
Queen.
It's fun. Yeah. So Conclave, the story of Conclave. The Pope is dead, and we got to pick a new Pope. And we follow Ralph Fiennes. How do you say this guy's name?
Ray Fiennes.
Ray Fiennes. We follow Ray Fiennes' character, who he's an archbishop, I guess, or whatever the rankings are, and he has been charged with facilitating the the process of selecting a new pope, which is
Mm-hmm.
called a conclave. So all these archbishops from around the world gather at the Vatican, and they get sequestered, and then they just kind of hash it out until they pick a pope.
That's actually the whole movie. We're done.
And that is the whole movie. And there are a handful of archbishops who have varying politics from one another, who have varying political ambitions, varying political viability. So the movie is following the politicking between them as they kind of jockey for position, because the way that the voting process works is
I'm just gonna correct you so
they
quickly because I know we have
oh yeah,
Catholics in the chat. They're all cardinals. Cardinal is
cardinals,
the
cardinals,
term across
cardinals.
the board. These are all cardinals.
Got it. Thank you.
Mhm.
Um, so the way that the votes work is the cardinals gather, they write their votes on a little slip, then somebody reads out, this person got this many, this many, this many. And then if there was not a majority for one of them, all the vote slips get burned, and they're like, okay, we'll come back tomorrow and we'll vote again.
Do it again.
So you're aware of how the votes are shifting and who's winning, but you're not aware of who voted for whom. There's not like a chance for them to get up and kind of campaign in front of each other. um, so it's all this kind of like smoke filled room, king making stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting. One of my roommates really did not like it. uh she was sort of like, it's just a bunch of dudes talking, which
Wow.
it is.
Yeah.
And I think it's fair to not like it if that's not your thing. That is extremely my shit. And I really enjoyed this movie.
I
Yeah,
was
what did you think
talking
of it?
to a movie fan of I met recently, and she was like, "Oh, my roommate, I really want to watch this movie, but like she doesn't like it. She tends to like reality TV. Like, what's the sell for her?" And I was like, "This movie is kind of reality TV.
This is reality TV, yeah, 100%.
It's actually very reality TV, and you should frame it like a bunch of fucking gay but not gay queens hanging out in a room together
Yeah.
until they make a decision and they just can't stop being self-centered. What if that was a movie?" And then that worked, and she was like, she loved the movie. I'm like, it's kind of
Yeah.
camp. It's kind of nuts. Also, I loved Conclave.
Yeah,
It
definitely.
really doesn't seem like it's gonna be a fun movie. Like, I saw the trailer or the premise, and I was like, man, whatever. Like, Oscar bait, Pope movie, such a simple premise. Who cares? But the way that it pulls you in, especially via Fiennes' character and how he is both your perspective, but also like one of the shakers, the makers and shakers of it, is so compelling. Because first of all, it's absolutely stunning to look at. It manages to feel immersive and also broad and expansive. There's like a moment where an explosion goes off and it pops through the window, and everybody just stares for like 30 seconds at a beam of light. And I was like, especially when you are in the Vatican, something like that happening, you're like, that means something. That has to mean something, right? It's the,
right,
I don't remember the exact meme, but it's like, the person's doing tarot cards, and then they see one that is the hanged man, but it's their face hanged, and they go, I wonder what that means. That's like kind of the feeling of this movie, is everyone being like, am I destined to be is this all working for me? The problem is they all think that. They're all like, it must be me. And no, they cannot decide on that. It's so juicy and funny and petty. How do you make a vote when everybody wants to be president? I wrote in my Letterboxd review that something I think that's like really fun, the sort of fantasy of this film, is in our modern political climate, like the idea that electoralism could actually work, that we're like, oh, we can, in theory, if everybody wants it, but we really find the best candidate, then we're going to get a good pope out of this. And the movie does reach that conclusion. Like, actually, you can, just depends on what you tell and don't tell other people, and why you don't tell other people that information. And it's not just about being George Washington and saying, well, I'm the best because I don't want it. Because that's what Lawrence, what Fiennes' character says. But he does want it. Ultimately, he's not George Washington, the myth of George Washington, that is. It is this other papal candidate who just kind of subtly slides in, and everyone says early on in the movie, hey, there's a guy from Afghanistan. He does work in Afghanistan. Is he cool? Can we? Should he? Okay.
Yeah, he says that he's a cardinal, but we don't have proof, but it seems real. Yeah,
let him come. Why not?
Yeah. Yeah, I love what's great about because this movie, like you're saying, it kind of presents itself as like, oh, what this is like an Oscar movie about like cardinals or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about that.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of presents itself as if it's going to be that sort of thing. Um, and when you were talking about it, it got me thinking that I think the reason that a lot of these kind of like there's a main character and we're going to look at a long stretch of their life kind of movies don't feel as enticing is because like how do you really tell a cohesive story about 10-20 years of life as
Right.
opposed to do what Anora's doing or what Conclave's doing, where it's like here is a moment in time, here is like the most one of the most pivotal days or pivotal weeks in this character's life where things change for them, and we're going to zoom in on that and really examine it. And what this movie does is it does that for Ray Fiennes' character and kind of asks this question of him and of us, which is sort of like, what role does ambition play in your life? And
Right.
when is ambition a bad thing? And when can it actually be a good thing?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think we walk away from this movie feeling like the Ray Fiennes character probably would have been a decent pope, I think.
Maybe.
I think he could have been good at it. He has a good head on his shoulders. He has decent values if we're measuring him against relatively against like other cardinals in the Catholic Church.
Right.
But he's determined to insist that he doesn't want it and that he'd be bad at it. Um, and almost like fucks up the whole thing by pretending at impartiality when he's just
Exactly.
not.
Yeah.
Um, and it's so fascinating to watch him figure that out for the Stanley Tucci character to be like, come on, man, you've already picked your Pope name in your head. Like, don't
Yeah.
give me that bullshit. I know that
You
there's
want it.
no way you get to this position in life. There's no way that you give up so much and that you devote so much unless there's a part of you that is like, it'd be cool to be the Pope. I think I would like to do that.
Yeah, you have to want it. Like
Yeah.
inherently it means wanting it, but also something about being Catholic is about not letting yourself want too much. So
Uh-huh.
there's this infinite tension between everyone there. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's fascinating also the ways that this movie in a lot of ways, like this movie isn't really about religion very much, or it's not really about religious belief so much, um, but it kind of is. It's about it insofar as these guys who are at the top of the church
Yeah.
are not any more certain about their belief in God than anybody else. In
Right.
fact, there are many moments where they say to each other, like, I'm having my doubts about my faith or whatever. And Stanley Tucci's character is like, the Pope was having his doubts about the church. And I'm kind of like, he's in charge of the church. Like,
He's
what are you talking
my brother
about?
Chris, he's the church.
He's the church. But that's really fascinating too, like how you can be in a position of power, but there are just so many people who are jockeying for position and have their pockets of power that you can feel powerless in that
Yeah.
position and you can feel really disaffected with a system that presumably you're at the top of.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting to me. I love the role that language plays in this movie too, because the Italian guy who's like the real conservative Italian Pope candidate guy.
Racist cardinal is what I have him in
Yeah.
my notes.
Yeah. He's a great character. He's always like eating something and complaining.
Yes.
I love earlier in the movie, he talks about, it used to be better because we used to all speak Latin. We used to all speak the same language. And now everybody's kind of broken off into, well, those guys speak English, those guys speak Spanish. And, he's wrong-headed for being like, oh, it used to be better when we all spoke Latin. But he does have a point to a certain extent because you feel in the movie the division and the language barriers, and you can see moments where characters choose to speak in a different language and how political of a choice that is.
Yeah.
The moment where Ray finds is eulogizing the Pope and he's doing it in Italian, I think. And then he's like, you know,
Yeah.
I'm just going to speak from the heart. And he starts speaking English, gives this beautiful speech, and then the camera kind of looks at like the crowd of cardinals in a wide shot, and the movie's like, I'm not going to tell you what they thought about that. Some of them might not have even understood it.
Yeah.
Anyway, next scene.
Yeah, man. I think that's my last biggest point on Conclave that I love about it is it's kind of, you said it's not really about religion. And I know like we've had listeners who, again, like are either lapsed Catholics or still engaged with the Catholic Church who are like, this film takes on a new meaning when you understand who they're parodying. Like a lot of these people are like
Totally,
straight up
I bet.
are like, we know which cardinals that they're making fun of here a little bit. They're taking the piss. And that's a great, like, I love that there's a satire to it. But to me, it's also about like leaving your bubble of either conservatism or liberalism and realizing that like in the real world, when you have to make decisions like this, your politics simply don't make you a better person than the other guy. Across the board. The movie takes a very neutral, I think, political position on that. And in a way becomes kind of radical in its ending by saying like racist Pope is just as wrong-headed and unlikely to win as Stanley Tucci's woke Pope. They're both coming at it from like, I'm obviously right. And in saying that, you have lost the battle. By saying the other guy is stupid, by creating an other like that, you're like, okay. The guy, you know, Tucci's character Bellini, Cardinal Bellini, is so like, he's racist. What are you guys talking? He's the Democratic Party, you know, the United States Democratic Party. Why would you guys vote for the orange Cheeto? Like, just, but you have in yourself no opinion. You just know that the other guy's bad. And you're like, I would allow gay people. And it's like, that's not a platform. Like, Lawrence has to tell him, like, that's not a platform to be like, I like gay people. And I think maybe we could have women in the church because no one's going to vote for you, dude. That's not what people think about. And then the other guy is like, oh, there's outsiders, and that's why we should all vote against them. And it's like, not all of us agree with you, dude. It's not a bad thing for someone to be an outsider in the church. So by staking your claim in my position against his, you lose the battle ultimately. Instead of trying to understand the material reality of who's in front of you, engaging with your community, which is ultimately like what Benitez end up doing is like, I have my own opinions on things. I want my vote to be fair. I want to be voted on fairly. Let what comes happen. You know, I'm willing to embrace whatever the results are. He truly ends up being the sort of like neutral Pope that deserves it. And in that final third act surprise, reveals that all of this posturing about men and women and bodies, and like you said, the movies this year are a lot about bodies. Who even cares? He's born intersex, guys. You freaking dummies! You just elected an intersex pope. The literal scene after he's like, "This is my name as pope. Congratulations, God bless." He's like, "By the way, born with both genitals." Like what? And you just watch Lawrence be like, like, does that fundamentally change my decision? I guess it doesn't. I guess you're still a good pope, probably. Like, wait.
Yeah. Right.
It comes to this I said earlier, it comes to this sort of radical conclusion of like, well, hey, who cares? Actually, who cares? I think that's why.
Yeah, there's a lot in the movie leading up to that gets you to be thinking about gender and the gendered nature of power within the Catholic Church, through Isabella Rossellini's character and her perspective, because we get so many. She's like the head nun, or I don't know exactly the titles there.
Sister Agnes is her character's name. I don't know
Sister
what the
Agnes.
title is.
And there are a lot of scenes where like these guys will be yelling at each other, and then it'll cut to the hallway, and she's sitting in the hallway listening to it, or she's like watching from across the room. And she then herself gets involved in the politicking of the situation. But you're kind of like, wow, what the heck? This is so messed up that there's this gender, binary. And then the movie's like, well, but you didn't even think about the fact that this guy has a uterus. So
yeah, deal with it.
What do you think about that? And the movie also asks these questions of like, a lot of different people have secrets, and like, what kind of secrets is Ray Fiennes' character willing to keep for others versus not? what things actually bother him or to him seem disqualifying for somebody. Because there's a whole bit about John Lithgow's character who becomes like kind of the liberalish front runner, but then it turns out that he's been bribing people and selling off church property.
Right.
And then it's like, fuck. I mean, politically, he's better than the Italian guy, but the Italian guy's not doing any secret bad shit. All of his bad shit, he's just shouting at the top of his lungs.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's like, what's the morality there? It's really, really interesting. So
Yeah, you have
yeah.
that's the I think the reason why it takes place in the Catholic Church is like there are certain things that will, no matter what you say about them morally, will just eliminate you. You know, Cardinal
Yeah.
Adeyemi like seems like a great pick very early in the film, and they're like, awesome, we're so woke, first African Pope, this is gonna be so awesome. Oh, you had a kid with a woman. You'll never win Pope in the rest of your life. You have completely wiped your chances to 0.
The scene where he's talking to Ray Fiennes' character, he's like, come on, please tell me there's still hope. And he's like, no. You
No,
just have such a scene. Like, it's literally impossible for you to be Pope.
you'll never. Just you should stop trying.
Yeah.
It's so funny and sad at the same time. Oh, man.
So good. All right. So that's Conclave. Let's talk about Dune Part 2.
Okay.
And this is kind of the, I would say, I don't know if it's the biggest like blockbustery movie here, but it versus Wicked, but those two are definitely the two most commercial films in the list, I think.
Yeah.
We both saw Dune 2 together. We were in different parts of the movie theater because we got there a little bit late and somebody was sitting in the wrong seat in the row, and it like messed up the whole row that we were supposed to sit in. And I was like, okay, I'll just find a different seat. So then I sat in the front row, and the forced perspective meant that it looked like everybody had those big Chad meme chins in the movie,
Yeah.
which kind of enriched the experience.
Agreed.
To see Paul
Agreed.
Muad'Dib Atreides be like, I'm the Cuisax Haderach. Got the big meme chin.
May thy knife chip and shatter.
What do you think of Dune Part 2?
I had fun. I had a really good time at the movies. I think it's really hard to judge with the rest of these because Dune, the first Dune's release, or I guess Denis Villeneuve's for Dune 1, really lined up with me getting back into cinema and getting back into watching movies. So like I watched that one in IMAX with friends and was like, wow, what a spectacle. I love movies. And that really kickstarted me watching more movies. And then years went by and I didn't think about it. And then 2024 comes and it's like, okay, I'm ready. So much of Dune 1's, like, my problems with it were like it being a part 1 means that they cannot fulfill any of the plot threads that they started. And so Dune 2 is all plot resolution. It's all action and worm riding and tragedy and magical sisters and battles and knife fights and black and white sequences and funny costuming. It's all killer, no filler. But it's also a part 2 of like what is ultimately, I think, like a 4.5-hour epic, really, if you think about the Dune movies combined. So like, I really like it, and part of the reason I like it is because it's a part 2. They only had to do the good parts. And so it's like, is this a good movie by itself? Because my same coworker, she's like, do I need to watch the first one? And I was like, you absolutely do. You're not gonna love it, but you do have to watch it. And then you probably will like the second one more. And she kind of didn't love it. But also, I think these are such like, and I said earlier, I don't like it when people are like, you got to watch it in the theater. I really think these are benefited from seeing them big and loud.
100%. 100%.
Denis Villeneuve knows how to make a movie that uses the theater sound system a lot and the screen size. You want to be enveloped in that desert. You want to feel that sand and those thumpers or whatever they're called. You got to put your hand in in the thingy, the pain box.
Yeah, the for the Gom Jabbar, you're saying?
Thank you. Girl, you got that Gom Jabbar.
Gom Jabbar.
Yeah. Old Chatz bit. Yeah, it's fun. It's a good time. I love the book. I'm glad I engaged with this franchise before Dune 2. I think it's better than the first one, but that is because it didn't have to do any of the setup that the first one did.
Mm. Yeah, I think Dune 2 for me raises some interesting questions about how do you pick a best picture.
Yeah.
Because first of all, like you're saying, it's a sequel. A quick scan of best picture winners back to like the 60s or so, I could only find two movies that were sequels that won best picture. And there
Which are
might be
what?
more from earlier than that. But those were Lord of the Rings Return of the King
And Godfather Part 2.
and Godfather Part 2.
Yeah.
Um, and both of those, Lord of the Rings Return of the King feels like this is an Oscar for the 9-hour epic of Lord of the Rings. Like, we have to give it something.
Yes.
Because I don't know that that's necessarily the best of those three movies
Mm-hmm.
or like a best picture of that year. I'm not sure. I'd have to think about it more. Godfather 2, it's like, okay, that movie's pretty good. Um, whatever. So, and also the story of Godfather 2 is like kind of self-contained from Godfather 1. Whereas Dune
Yeah.
Part 2, they took a book and split it in half is also what's going on here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it doesn't feel quite right to say this is best picture for those reasons. Um and also the things that I love about Dune Part 2 have so much to do more to do with like what you're saying, the experience of watching it in the movie theater and the movie kind of washing over you, it
Mm-hmm.
being this pure like feast of sight and sound, and there's like amazing sensations that the movie communicates, like the whole bit with Fade Routha in the gladiator pit,
The
where
freaking guys
it's
with the
like
outfits and it's all in black and white.
it's in
Amazing.
black and white. That part is so, and the mute, like the, you're
Oh,
like, fuck, it's June. Whoa, this
yeah.
is cool.
It really
Like,
is.
it's that feels amazing, and that does something that none of these other movies are doing. I love Denis Villeneuve, and that very specific thing that he does in Arrival, that he does in Blade Runner 2049, that he does in the Dune movies. Um, but like, I don't know, like, is that a best picture thing? Am I now falling into the kind of, is it an Oscar-y movie type of argument? I don't know. And then I'm also wondering how much of what I love about it is just that like Dune is cool
Right.
and there's just cool ideas from the book
Yeah.
that are now on the screen. Because in some ways, like the David Lynch Dune, you could argue from a craft perspective is like worse than the Denis Villeneuve Dune movies, but in some ways, though that movie feels like more of a picture than the
Yes.
Denis Villeneuve movies because it's just fucking weird and David Lynch adds like other stuff to it and it's strange in its own way. Whereas the Dune movies that Denis Villeneuve is doing feel like it's taking a strange thing and making it possible to consume it in the movie theater,
Correct.
which I think is cool in its own way. And it means that hopefully we're gonna get like fucking God Emperor of Doom doing like Worm King shit in a couple
Yeah. Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
That would
Yeah.
be awesome.
Yes.
But
Please.
it is very much like kind of the sci-fi blockbusterification of Dune
Right.
as a thing. So yeah.
Yeah.
But
That's
it's
the
a
thing.
great movie.
That's the thing with adaptations, right? Is like I loved
Mhm.
Nickel Boys, but I'm like, do I like the Colson Whitehead novel Nickel Boys, or do I like the film Nickel Boys? I think I like
Mm.
both, but it's hard to
Yeah.
differentiate what I like about one or the other.
Right.
Um, so yeah, I think that's always going to be a conversation to have. But
Yeah.
listen, Austin Butler, again on that same
Oh my
conversation with the
god.
movie lover last night, she made a
Yeah.
point that we were joking like in Elvis, he did interviews afterwards saying he couldn't drop the accent because he worked too hard on it and like stuck with it. And she was like, "Go back and watch Doom Part 2. Fade Routha still has the Elvis accent a little bit." And I was like, "That's the great." That means that because the thing about Villeneuve's movies so much is that they're very constructed. They're very films. They don't feel realistic. They don't feel like our world. They're whisked away to a different
Mhm.
universe.
Mhm.
But every once in a while, you see a little thing like that, and you're like, that's Austin Butler. Like you see past all the CG, beautiful cinematography, and you go, 20-something-year-old boy.
Yeah.
Doing an accent by accident. Maybe by accident, maybe not. And I just think that that's so brilliant. So cool.
It kind of works for Fade Routha. Like Sting was Fade Routha in the David Lynch movie. Like you kind of want a swaggery, sexy singer guy as Fade Routha, so it works. I wish there was, there's best and best supporting actor and actress. I wish there was like just like a best little guy.
Yeah,
because I think Austin Butler, he really earns it for best freak. I feel with
I think so.
Performance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's Dune Part 2. Are you ready to talk about Emilia Pérez?
Are you emotionally ready to talk about our collective least favorite Oscar Best Picture nominee? Yes, I'm ready.
Yeah. Okay. It's every person whose opinion I trust, including you.
Thank you.
Was like, this is a bad movie. Don't watch it.
Yeah.
And I
naturally
was like,
you watched it.
I was like, well, now I gotta see it.
Yeah, you did. Okay, I'm glad you did.
Me too. And I have come to conclude that everybody whose opinion I trust was right. And this movie is not good.
Quick summary up top. Emilia Pérez is about 3 different women in Mexico. Cartel leader Emilia Pérez, her lawyer Rita, who's played by Zoe Saldana, and her wife, who's played by Selena Gomez. And their sort of stories intertwined around this idea of Emilia growing up as a man, as a cartel leader, and then using her money and resources and this lawyer to successfully transition and restart a new life. This is all framed as a musical, sort of romantic dramedy. It's every single genre at once. And also the back third of it is about fixing the political wrongs in the country of Mexico, or attempting to. Sounds interesting, right? Now, hold on. Who directed it? Oh, a 70-something-year-old Frenchman who's never been to Mexico. Oh, we've run into an issue here. And that is that not only is Emilia Pérez a deeply suspect movie that frames trans people in a really problematic way, it, say what you will about that part of it. It's great that Carla Sofia Gascon is trans, and they did that bare minimum of effort, right? Yes. It also scandal noted with her and all of her old tweets. But like beyond that, it feels like they truly didn't do the work. This feels like a hack job film, and it not only commits the sin of being borderline offensive and frustrating to watch, it is also really boring.
Yes.
It commits every sin you can possibly commit in a Best Picture nominee film. It is politically fraught. The songs aren't even that good. And it is boring. How did you guys whiff everything about this movie? Oh my God.
I know. It's truly a baffling film for all of those reasons that you described, because when you were summarizing the plot, my reaction was like, oh, that sounds like an interesting movie.
Right.
And like what you said was not factually inaccurate about the plot or the way that the movie operates, but the movie just doesn't feel like it's doing anything. You're watching it and you're like, there are things happening, but nothing's happening. I don't understand why there's this profound disconnect between me as the viewer and the sequence of images that are happening in front of me.
Yeah.
But like, it's just not working or doing a thing. And to me, I think fundamentally why that's happening is because of the distance that the movie has between itself and the namesake character Emilia Pérez. We get so little of her interiority, and it feels like the film is from the perspective of the Zoe Saldana character, insofar as it's expecting you as an audience member to be on the outside of a trans experience and be like, oh, well, it's kind of nudging you like, what do you think about this Emilia Pérez person, huh? Like, what do you think? And I don't want a movie to do that. I want a movie called Emilia Pérez to be like, hey, I'm Emilia Pérez, and here's my experience. Like the way that Anora does that, where it's like, oh, it's called Anora. It's about Anora. You can have a movie that's named after a character who's not the main character, but you would expect to like be in that person's experience. And this movie is just like wanting to examine Emilia Pérez from the outside in a way that is honestly like fundamentally offensive.
That's well said.
The Jesse gender video on this movie is very thorough and very good, and a lot of things that I'm going to say about it are pretty similar to things that Jesse said in that video. So I would recommend it as like a palate cleanser. If you choose to watch this film, you can then go watch a 2.5 hour video essay helping you to process the film.
It's called The Racist Cisgender Nonsense of Emilia Pérez.
Yeah. And you know, I think something that Jesse gets at in that video, and I think what's at the core of my frustration with this movie, is it's wanting to ask the question of like, can you ever really change who you are? There's the whole bit where the doctor's like, I only changed the body. I could do whatever, give you a vagina, but you could still be a bad person. And the movie's like, that's our theme. Okay. Right. Like you could turn into a girl, but you're still going to be bad. And that just kind of like takes as a given a few things about transness and about gender that are from a cisgender perspective. Like it assumes the movie operates as if transition is this thing where you like snap your fingers and now you've magically changed into a girl. When really like someone's reckoning with their gender, as someone like myself, I think in the last year or so, I've been thinking a lot more about my relationship to gender. And there's been nothing sudden about that process. Like it's very introspective. And the deeper and the more I think about it, the more I walk away like, I don't know. I'm actually not sure.
Yeah.
And the way that this movie treats Emilia Pérez's transition, first of all, its insistence to show her pre-transition is in and of itself this kind of like this perspective fascination with transition being the most and only interesting thing about a trans experience. Like the kind of practicalities of, okay, but what operations do you do? Like, oh, how does this, it's like, that's not what's interesting here. And then it kind of speaks to like, okay, Emilia's been on HRT for 2 years. We do a 4-year time jump before we really see her in the world fully performing femininity. So the movie's like, well, you know, practically speaking, it takes a while to transition and reckon with these things. But it takes like 5 minutes in the span of the movie. And when that time jump happens, when she does the transition surgeries, which all happen in the same night, by the way, which is just not a thing. And then the movie's like 4 years later the screen. I was like, what the fuck are you talking? What?
That's
like,
the biggest sin that the movie commits. That's where I was going to jump in. Because like, if you're going to make a movie about trans people and then skip the whole part where they're figuring things out, then like, what did you actually want to show me? You know, why did you do the 4-year jump? Is so you didn't have to show what is actually the trans experience, which is every day going, how much do I want to turn this dial today? And do I even want to turn certain dials? Or maybe I want to go backwards, or maybe I want to go forwards or left or right, or, you know, upside down, or I want to make a new gender. Instead, it's like, there's this mode, there's this mode. Don't worry about the stuff in the middle. Don't just, we did 80 surgeries at once. We did all the therapy in the world. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about insurance. Don't worry about the way the society looks at her for those 4 years. Now she's perfectly 100% girl moding. Never think about the past and you think about her mind and like, is she still, you have the heart of a killer? And it's like, but that's not how it works. It
Yeah.
doesn't, and it does the trans community a disservice to even portray it like that, you know?
Mhm.
It doesn't, you don't flip a switch. There are fantasies and dreams and like beautiful stories that are inspiring to people about being able to snap your fingers and suddenly become a different gender, become a different person. But
Mhm.
this movie takes place in real life in theory, and it
Right.
also deliberately skips it. It doesn't even flip a switch in the movie. They could just be like, and we found a thing that lets you flip a switch and do it,
Yeah.
firmly setting us in the realm of fantasy. But instead it says, yeah, the real world stuff, like, we just don't want to show you that. And the answer is probably because, like, they don't know what that looks like. They didn't ask. They didn't
Mhm.
think about it. Or they were like, we kind of want to talk about her fixing Mexico, though. So we're just going to
Yeah.
get her to the part where she's a successful woman in society.
Yeah, and I think what they're interested in is another kind of harmful stereotype, which is this idea that someone, specifically like a trans woman's objective, is to get away with or like trick people into believing that she's a woman so that she could do X, Y, or Z. Like whatever, however harmful that stereotype is, depending on who's conceiving of it.
Yeah.
In this movie, it's I want to trick people into thinking that I'm really a woman so that I can live a new life or, see my kids again, that kind of
Yeah.
thing. Um, but I think, to your point about the sort of like flip the magic switch thing, this is a what's that called? Thought experiment that I've been thinking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, okay, let's just accept the gender binary and accept this idea of like you can press the girl mode button or the boy mode button and switch. Um, and I think like a cis perspective on that is like, okay, there's a girl mode button. Would you press it? Well, why would I press the girl mode button? I guess if I wanted to do XYZ, and it's all about kind of the material benefits or scenarios in which there are things that I would want to do, but I can't because for some reason, like my being a man precludes me from doing that.
Yeah.
Or it could be kind of interesting to see what this would be like as a woman.
Yeah.
But I think that reasoning comes from a first assumption, which is like, well, I'm a guy. So if I'm a man, why would I hit the girl mode button? Probably because I'd want to do XYZ. As opposed to like when I think about the girl mode button, the thought process is not like, well, why would I want to do that? The thought process is, yeah, okay, okay, hold on. Let's think about this for a second. Why would I want to stay a guy? You know what I mean? And like that feels like more of the thinking that could go into that.
Hmm.
And the reason that somebody would slap the magic button is just kind of because they want to do it.
Yeah. And it feels right.
And
It feels correct.
right. And there's not like a scheme or like a trick that's motivating that.
Right.
But this movie is kind of assuming that like, well, there's got to be like, what's the angle here?
Right.
What's the scheme?
What are you really trying to accomplish? And it's like, I want my body to reflect the way that I feel a little bit
Yeah.
closer on the inside. To, if those can be in lockstep, then I will live happier, and other people want to
Yeah.
police that and tell me what I can and can't be and how I do or don't look. And the movie doesn't have like cartoon transphobes yelling at her at any point in the film being like, you're actually like, there isn't,
Right.
they hold off on the one thing of like people realizing it until the very like end of the movie. And that's, I will actually laud the film for that. It's not about people like her struggling in that
Yes.
way, but that is the lived experience for a lot of trans people too, is constantly feeling like you're under pressure or under scrutiny no matter how hard you try. Whereas in this movie it's like, no, she's perfect, she nailed it, she's passing, she's everything she wanted to be out of being a woman. It's just that she cannot live the same life that she did before, and that is not, and neither of us are trans women, to be clear, but like
Right.
that isn't the lived experience of any trans woman that I know. And there's just, ultimately there's a lot of nuance and stuff you could have done with this film. I even think you should allow trans narratives to be goofy and like do a fun trans musical. I know people love Hedwig and the Angry Inch. That movie or that musical has great portrayals, or really fascinating portrayals of trans people. Rocky Horror Picture Show also like playing with gender stuff in a musical context, in a comedic musical context. So this movie is like kind of stepping in the footsteps of giants and like not doing anything with that. It's not making a statement. It's not changing the narrative at all. It's just this man's attempt at being like, trans people, huh? Interesting. You ever think about that? It's like, yeah, I do think about that every day, dude. And then what?
It seems like you don't really in the same way. And I, like you're saying, there is a movie here that I was interested in watching, and there is like a complicated, nuanced movie in this question of like, okay, this is a person who is like a drug kingpin who is a woman, a trans woman. And like, what's that about? What is it like to transition and to really reckon with the fact that like you were all in on patriarchy, like hardcore 100%. You were like the top guy of the guys insofar as how you were operating in society and the power that you were wielding, both in this drug cartel and within your own family unit. And the transition process is a process also of confronting those things and deconstructing that and finding that within your own life, seeing the ways that you benefited from and wielded patriarchal power, even if you are not a man. The fact that you were perceived as such in society for so long by so many means that you materially benefited from that and harmed many people in the process, and now reckon with it. That is a really interesting movie that the film thinks it is, but it's not, because it like does not show us what Emilia Pérez thinks about that. It doesn't indicate. It kind of hints that Emilia Pérez is thinking about that, sort of, in like a not very thoroughly done way. And instead, it just spends a little too much time doing like a Mrs. Doubtfire kind of thing. And it's like, guys, what the fuck is this? And then Selena Gomez does karaoke with a guy in a cowboy hat, and that part's pretty good, actually.
She's having fun. She's bringing it. I can't begrudge anybody for being in this movie, but I don't like this movie and I don't want to think about it for too much longer. It makes me angry.
Yeah. If this wins Best Picture, I will be upset.
It can't.
About that.
There's simply no shot. I will throw something.
I think anybody who votes for this only watch the first 15 minutes.
Also true. Yeah, there was, and I don't like to talk about discourse too much, but like there's been so much talk online of people being like, this movie sucks. Why does anybody like it? And it's like, did you watch it? Because I don't want to be lumped into the same club of people who say they hate it because it's about trans people. I don't want to be lumped into the same people who say they hate it because they think it's offensive. I want people who watched the movie to tell me they hated it and be like, you hated it because you watched it and you thought it was bad. This like internet hot takes machine encourages you to like have an opinion. And it's like, just watch. It's on Netflix, guys. If you don't think you're going to like it, then don't watch it. But I don't want people coming online being like, do we need a campaign against Emilia Pérez? It's also, I think it's worth saying, we're technically pronouncing the name of the movie wrong. There's an accent on the E, the first E, and it's Emilia Pérez.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's just acknowledging our whiteness here for a sec. I just, people should watch the movie if they're going to say it's bad and you shouldn't watch it, then watch it. Have an opinion from having seen it. That's my take.
That's a fair take.
Thank you.
You want to quickly tell me a little bit about Nickel Boys?
I do, yeah. I mean, I'm really struggling with we can talk at the end about like what's our real pick. For me, this was the most striking Oscar Best Picture film. Nickel Boys is an adaptation of a book by Colson Whitehead called Nickel Boys, about these two young African-American boys named Elwood and Turner, who are sent to a men's boarding school in the late 1950s in the sort of heat of the civil rights movement. And the film is shot from primarily a first-person perspective. The beginning of the film,
interesting.
Yes, it's entirely first person. But the movie starts by being in the perspective of Elwood and how he ends up getting sent to this school through sort of like racial systemic injustice. And I don't want to give away the whole ghost, but like the movie plays with its first person perspective in like, this is the power of what movies can do kind of ways.
Oh.
The movie does eventually shift to Turner's first person perspective. And there are a lot of scenes where it's like, who do we want to be the protagonist of this scene? We're going to do a quick hot swap. And it feels seamless.
Oh.
And
Fascinating.
again, to not give up like the third act of this movie, the movie also is aware that like you've been doing this shift back and forth and like, who am I looking at right now? And sort of brings into question like, are these guys have very different views on injustice and racism, but like who is who anymore? Names matter a lot, characters matter a lot. It's a heartbreaker, right? I think this movie does at face value fit under the racism is bad Oscar bait movie. You know, it being in the civil rights movement, it being about African American people, it using like white actors to be like cartoonishly racist, but like it's very poetic. It's very like there are moments of physical violence that happen to the boys at school where they will show it through this like interpretive series of flashes, because the movie is also about memory and about like how we recall those traumatic events. And so like if you're being physically abused, that's not something, that's a trauma that you don't want to keep, you know, front of mind for the rest of your life. You'd rather keep little flashes of, oh, when I was a kid and I was on a bus, a little girl stuck her head under the bus seat and said hi to me and then slid away. And I thought that was beautiful and I chose to see that. But when I was being like attacked, I don't want to think about that. So I'm going to show it, but like they don't put it in the front of your face because that's not how they remembered it. And I think my last big point is that by the third act, when I talk about like the movies playing with like, who are you looking at? It's also doing time jumps to sort of the present day of one of their lives and how he's like grown up and is learning about like what happened after the school closed down. And I think those scenes are absolutely stunning. I believe the guy who plays them, Daveed Diggs, plays a sort of grown up one of the boys. And it's so fascinating how this movie takes the story of two guys and their like journey to survive. And I don't know, it just talks about it has a lot to say about like when something horrible happens to you as a kid, right? You go through this trial. Does it put a chip on your shoulder? Does it make you a better person to have survived it? And what's the value of telling the story if like we still live in a deeply racist society, right? Like there's this plot point about one of them trying to write down everything that he saw. And like, maybe I'll give this to press someday. And the sort of the sadness of that is like, the press doesn't care. It doesn't serve a narrative to be like, this school is beating the crap out of, I'm sorry to say it, like they're physically like hurting young boys, and promising them that they can escape when there really is no escape until they're 18 years old. So yeah, it's a really intense film. I wouldn't say it's that hard of a watch. I really do want to rewatch it because it's so poetic and so many of its lines are like clearly ripped directly from the book. I'm like, maybe I want to read the book someday, but it sort of like takes ideas from the book and brilliantly dips in and out of their lives at key points in this first person perspective and tells a really cool story, really thought-provoking story about identity and trauma. I really liked it. It's if you don't want to watch it, this is my last point. If you don't want to watch it because you're like, it's another racism movie, I encourage you or if you're like, first person movies make me nauseated, it succeeds in not being nauseating because it's mostly stationary shots. And it knows that you think it's just a racism movie. It has more to say than that. Okay. That's what I got. Nickel Boys.
Yeah, I really want to watch that. That's amazing.
I think it'll do things for you. It'll get you where you need to be, so to speak.
Okay, speaking of movies that are going to do things for you, let's talk about The Substance.
Talking about movies that, like, how did this get the Best Picture? I'm so happy that Coralie Farge and company were able to get this one nommed. It's so weird. This movie rocks.
Yeah, this movie is really something else. It's amazing. Okay, so the plot of The Substance, our protagonist played by Demi Moore, is Elizabeth Sparkle, who is a famous woman, movie star, and is now kind of in that phase of her career where she's older and she's getting pushed out of the limelight because she's an older woman in Hollywood.
Older meaning
And as we
50,
know,
to be clear. Like, not even old, but
yes, older for like, yeah,
women in Hollywood.
the way that women are treated in media, in television and film. And so as that process is happening, she is approached by someone who's like, "Oh, you'd be a good candidate for this thing. Here's a USB drive that says The Substance on it." She goes home, she watches it, and The Substance is this treatment that you take, and it's gonna make a better you, a younger, more vibrant, beautiful, the you that you want to be. And all you got to do is take the substance, and you'll be good.
Easy.
There are a couple of rules to the substance.
Oh,
You gotta take it. You gotta do the upkeep for it.
okay.
It's gonna split you into two people. Okay.
Okay.
Um, but to be clear, you are the same person. Okay.
Got it.
You're not two distinct individuals. You are one, and you
Respect the
must
balance.
respect the balance. You must switch back and forth every 7 days. You have to. Okay.
Got it. Easy.
Cool. So from that point forward, it's just a nice little film where she follows all the rules and things go well for her.
Fix their
No, it's
career.
not.
Oh, no.
No, it is scary. Oh my God. She takes the substance and her back splits open and Margaret Qualley comes out of it. Oh my God. And now there's a second character named Sue, who's sort of like the young it girl who's taking Elizabeth Sparkle's position in society as like, I'm the one that everybody loves because I'm a hot young lady in Hollywood. And the movie does body horror stuff, and there's trouble with the swapping back and forth, and wow, this is a scary good movie.
Mm.
What did you like it?
Yeah, I had a great time. I'm pretty immune to like serious gore. I think that this movie has the caveat of like, you can watch all the Best Picture movies if you can deal with like sad things and tragedy and love loss and whatever. You have to be okay with about 21,000 gallons of blood in this film's climax. You have to be aware that this movie is going to explode human bodies onto your face in crisp HD, and that's got to be okay.
Yeah, but in some ways that is like the least horrific part of the movie.
It's the little things.
It's the camera work and the shot selection is so fucking genius in this movie, because the way that the camera will look at certain characters or certain objects at different times to communicate different feelings and to communicate how either Elizabeth or Sue feel about the situations that they're in. And in some ways, the scariest, most grotesque body horror moment is the sequence where Elizabeth is watching Sue's new workout show on TV, and you have all these kind of like gratuitous shots sexualizing Sue's body, that when it was in Sue's perspective, it was this celebratory, like euphoric, it feels so good to be the star and to feel desirable. And she's like in control of the way that her body's portrayed. And then Elizabeth's watching it on TV, and a lot of the shots of her face have been cut out, and it's just been edited in a way that is more leery and
Borderline pornographic.
mm-hmm. And we're intercutting that with Demi Moore ragefully preparing some French cuisine. And she like stuffs a chicken full of foie gras as she's watching this thing on TV. And that I'm like watching the scene like through my fingers, like, oh my God, this is the scariest thing I've ever seen. And there's no gore there necessarily. And then there's also very, very gory things like someone climbing out of somebody else's skin or like an eyeball puking out a boob, and
Yeah.
it's a lot. Um, but even watching Dennis Quaid eat shrimp, you're like, "Fuck,
Yeah.
this movie is disgusting." Oh my
I
god.
think it makes this sort of like not 101, but this fairly straightforward point that like when we see human bodies fall apart and get collapsed like this and get used like
Yeah.
this, we're like, oh my god, horrifying. But when it happens to a chicken getting stuffed full of food to it burst the point of bursting, or when it's a shrimp being ripped out of its shell and forced down your throat full of sauce and guts, then we're like,
Mhm.
I guess that's just food. But the movie's kind of like, no, that's still a body. It's just
Mhm.
not human. It redefines like that. You know, I think that like horror movies have been doing that exact concept forever. It's
Yeah.
nothing new, but it is a strong political statement, especially about women's bodies, you know?
Yeah. Because it's making, I think, a statement about the commodification of women's bodies and about um part of the reason that women are pushed out of the spotlight as they get older is this kind of fear of the aging process and fear of bodily transformation, a desire to not see those things. Um, and so for because over the course of the movie, the Sue and Elizabeth become more antagonistic towards each other. And it's not clear. It seems like they don't have each other's memories necessarily. They start to see each other as different people,
Right.
and Sue starts not switching when she's supposed to, which
Hmm.
causes Elizabeth's body to age more rapidly and to decay. So the movie's also kind of like, oh, you don't want to see Demi Moore get older? Well, get a load of this. You're
Yeah.
gonna have to look at it, and this is what you're scared of, right? This is why you don't want older women to like be in the limelight, because you don't want to look at a woman changing and getting older and aging out of this phase in her life where you can commodify her sexuality or her body, and that's like the only thing you're interested in.
Right. Right.
um so I think the movie does that in a really effective way.
It's also funny. Like it's
It's
pretty
very funny.
it's really
Yeah.
funny. Some ways that are intentional, some ways that are like this is just camp. Like this
So campy. Yeah.
obviously the final like blood explosion scene is intense and beautiful and you know, meaningful, whatever. But even
Hmm.
before that, like I forget what they call it. There's like a in the production team they named the version of Elizabeth that's like fully aged up and like hunched over and like this little gremlin of an aged up woman. um
Hmm.
all of that stuff is so campy. Her trying to put her clothes on over it and go outside in the world is like,
She goes like full Gollum and then full babushka mode.
yes.
Yeah, it's really funny.
You made a point in your notes that I think I also read this in Emily St. James's newsletter, but like this movie is kind of a better trans film than Emilia Perez. Like
Yes, that was
by
how I felt about it watching it. Yeah.
being about bodies and especially women's bodies and like we need your body to look a certain way. No, not that way. And like, okay, I'll do it. I'll
Hmm.
change myself to look like what you want. And they're like, no, that's still bad. The way you did it is still wrong. All of that, mind you, is saying like, oh, Demi Moore in this movie, Elizabeth's so old and so like unattractive. Demi Moore is 62 and is like a solid. She's one of the most beautiful women alive. Like, there's just
Hmm.
something so funny about being like, look at her, she's old and wrinkly, and it's literally a goddess of a. It's Demi Moore. Like, what are you
Hmm.
saying? The movie knows that you think that too. It's just, it's very self
Yeah.
aware. I have my
Right.
issues with it. I think like it hammers its point a little bit too hard sometimes, where it's like, okay,
Hmm.
you're really having fun and I get it, and it is scary and gross and violent, whatever, but like, okay, and then what? And it doesn't have too much more to say beyond what we've talked about here. Like, it's not a extremely nuanced complex film, but it does what
Hmm.
it's trying to do really really well and in a fresh and unique visual way that I had a good time with.
Yeah. I mean, I think what I would say about it is there is there is kind of like a clear reading that you can take of it, that the movie is forwarding and characters will say it sometimes,
Yeah.
like a character to or Demi Moore will be like, "Oh, I," or the Elizabeth character will be like, "Oh, I actually hate myself. Oh, this sucks. Like but I deserve, there's this other character who's doing the substance, and he's like, oh, it starts to get harder to believe that you matter or you deserve to be alive.
Right.
And it's kind of like, okay, the substance, I get it, I understand what you're saying. And they'll do a lot of like bringing back lines that characters said earlier in the movie, or their head is like floating in front of you on the screen so they can repeat a line that's relevant to this moment. And
Yes.
that feels very campy, and the movie doesn't want you to walk out feeling uncertain about something you could take away from it. And I do think that there are additional things that you can find in it if you're looking. Like that whole scene that I was describing with the cooking the French cuisine is kind of this critique or examination. You sent me a picture of Monstro Alyssa Sue.
My beautiful, beautiful mother.
Yeah. Which I have a thought on that. Let me pin that in my brain.
Sure.
But the scene where she's cooking
Yeah.
and is mad at the TV is, a commentary on these spheres of acceptable existence for women, and how you're either a young hot woman who we're leering at, or you're in the kitchen cooking a French meal for us to eat.
Mm-hmm.
And for there to be like this kind of rageful collision of those two things and a destruction of both of them is such a fascinating, cool moment of gender critique going on there. And then, yeah, like I was saying in my notes, I think this is a trans film, or can like 100% be read in that way, insofar as like when you make a movie about femininity and about women examining what does it mean to be a woman in a society that has very particular prescriptions about how you're supposed to be or look or act. You're doing a movie about the performance of gender, and then, okay, now we're doing a trans movie in a lot of ways, because um you're a character who's like, well, I want to perform and present gender in a certain way, and I don't feel like I can access that. And how do I get there? And then there's like a regimen of medicine that I can take to do that.
Hmm.
Okay,
Hmm.
interesting. There's like daily injections that I take in order to feel the way that I want to feel. I feel euphoric at times. I feel very dysphoric at times. I look at myself in the mirror and I don't recognize myself. It's like, I think, whereas Emilia Perez is like, yada yada's transition, the substance is like, no, yeah, let's really sit with this and figure out what does it feel like to try to engage in this process of changing.
Yeah.
And I think it highlights the peril of undertaking a transition when fundamentally the reason you're doing it is because you hate yourself. And like, there, I think something that I find hard, as I'm kind of thinking about gender and how I want to identify, is a kind of like acceptable expression of transness to in popular culture, which is this like complete abdication of a former self. Like, yeah, let me just kind of delete, who I was.
Wipe
Which
the
for
slate
some
clean and
people,
start over.
yeah, which for some people is what they want, and that is their experience, and that's great. Um,
But
but
it's not universal, right?
it's not universal, and I think to feel that that has to happen in order to accept someone as having changed, it it can sometimes lead to the experience that Elizabeth Sparkle has in this movie, where in order to be the person she wants to be, she's like disparaging and hating and destroying the person that she is and has been. And that is like clearly so painful for her.
Yeah.
And ultimately, as much as Dennis Quaid is like a creepy guy who's like saying horribly misogynistic things and eating shrimp in our face. He's not the villain of the movie.
Right.
It is a struggle against the self, and that
Yeah.
is like the core conflict of this film, which I think is so genius and interesting about it.
Yeah. Very well said. Yeah, I think there's a lot. There is more meat to be chewed on. There's plenty there, and it doesn't. It shoves a couple of its ideas down your throat, but there's more to it than just being
Mhm.
a woman is hard, you know. And even under
Yeah.
within that thesis, there's like 5 under sub theses that it makes.
And I think just my last point on it is like, whereas Anora, right, is this movie about patriarchy and about class, and it's kind of about like, sometimes you just got to get by, um, and figure out how to be yourself within the context of that.
Yeah.
But like, here are all these patriarchal systems that are kind of suppressing Anora or marginalizing her and how she's responding to them. The substance feels like those things exist, but they're kind of on the periphery of the film. And what the film is really asking and wondering about is, what does that then do to the relationships that women have with one another? Um, and how do the kind of like toxicities of patriarchy get transformed into resentment and jealousy and hatred and like the destruction of solidarity between women.
Yeah.
uh and I find that really interesting too, because it's like Elizabeth and Sue, the reason they hate each other is because they want like the approval of the patriarchal society. They don't question it or critique it. There is not a problem with like getting yourself plastered on a billboard and the Dennis Quaid character being like, "Ah, I love you. Everybody loves you." There's no point where she's like, "Oh, this guy's a pig," or whatever.
Right.
She wants his approval, and that has this destructive effect, which I think is the movie does a good job of portraying as well.
Yeah, man. It's this movie, if I can be a little personal for a sec, really
Sure.
made me confront not only my relationship to women and to gender and stuff, but like my relationship to pornography, right? Like
100%. 100%.
it's hard to ever think about looking at especially like cis hetero pornography and not think about like, is this a Sue happening, a character existing in front of me on this screen, like engaging in these acts because they want to be perceived a certain way? Is the storytelling in this making me feel like a powerful man? Like, I just,
Mm-hmm.
it's like we joke about how like listening to the Maintenance Phase podcast makes it hard to ever do a diet or listen to people talk about diets. Watching
Mm-hmm.
The Substance makes it hard to look to look at like simulated sex on screen and think about
Mm-hmm.
power dynamics. You just can't stop thinking about power dynamics. It'll kind of fuck that up for you for a while, or at least it did for me.
Yeah, 100%. And that like where those images also permeate throughout society
Yeah,
outside of explicitly sexual media too, and it's like, oh, ugh. Like even within the movie itself, and you're like, God, this is making me question like every single time that I feel arousal and like
correct.
what are the kind of dynamics at play.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not a movie to go into lightly, because it's really gonna linger with you in, I think, some important ways. But yeah,
So, are
I
we doing a
felt the same
joint?
thing.
Are we going to do Monster or Liza Sue for Halloween? Is that going to be our costume idea?
I'll be the Demi Moore face on the back, like.
I'll be the boob that's like erupting towards the end. Yeah. Hell yeah.
It's so funny that is like the catharsis of this
Right.
movie. You see Margaret Qualley like holding her ear that fell off of her head in the elevator, and
So
you're like,
good.
oh my God. And then she goes home and she's like, please make me a better version of myself.
Yeah.
And then it kind of does. Like Monstro Elizasu is kind of the best version of her.
She's the synthesis of both. Oh, you wanted to
Yeah.
be an ideal woman. You're everything. We put all of it in there for you.
Yeah.
it might not all
So good.
it might not all be stable, but it's all there. You wanted like new
Yeah.
boobs, new butt, new thing, whatever. It's all
Yeah.
her straining her hair in the picture I sent you. Oh, this movie knows what it's doing. It's so funny. Her, and I say her hair, like the 2 strands of hair falling off of this like crumbling thing that is a skull. She's like, I gotta straighten my hair. Oh, brilliant. Cinema.
All right. Last movie here is Wicked. So let's do the Wicked pod that everybody's been waiting for.
Welcome.
You know Wicked.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Welcome to the Wicked pod. You guys know Wicked. Tell them the plot of Wicked.
So this is a part 1 of Wicked. They've adapted the musical, which itself is an adaptation of a book, which itself is not an adaptation, but a kind of like, let's imagine an interpretation, some fan fiction almost type of vibe. Not to say that disparagingly, but more like to position it as what it is. Like, we're going to look at the Wizard of Oz world and tell a story. What if the Wicked Witch of the West and Glinda actually met in college and they were friends? And what's that all about? So that was a book. The book itself, from what I understand, is like it's kind of sexual and like dark, and what is going on there? And then the musical is like, well, let's clean this up a little bit and make it one of the most successful Broadway musicals of all time. And then the movie is like, yeah. And now let's make this a pretty good movie adaptation of that. They adapted the first half of the musical in this film, and then we're going to get the second half later this year. And they're doing the thing that I hate, by the way, which is they call the second part like Wicked, the next part or whatever. It's like just
Wicked for good.
Yeah. No thanks.
No thanks.
We got Cynthia Erivo in the role as Elphaba, the Wicked Witch of the West, eventually, and then we got Ariana Grande as Glinda.
The Wicked Witch of the North,
nominated
eventually, or the South if you're reading the book.
Oh, my details. And yeah, what did you think of Wicked?
I don't know. I feel so. This is the other reason I'm like intimidated by the idea of the Wicked pod is people love Wicked so much, dude. And I did enjoy it quite a bit. This movie flew by for me in the theaters. I was almost brought to tears with Defying Gravity, although they butchered the crap out of its pacing. That's objectively that's what happened there. I wasn't ever otherwise like blown away. I was generally entertained through all of it. I thought all the songs were good to great to fine. They run the gamut. And the casting is really good. If Cynthia Erivo doesn't win something tomorrow or tonight, I guess, then I'm gonna riot. She's gotta win something. Give this one an Oscar. I think Ariana Grande was an interesting casting choice because she's playing the sort of like mean girl, but she's kind of lovable character, and that does fit Grande's personality, but also she's just been trying. She's been vouching to play Glinda in some adaptation for her entire career. You know, you look back and like before she was even super famous, she was auditioning and doing Glinda stuff. So like this is a role she's been destined to play for a while. Casting's good. The movie looks pretty good. It's a little, there are parts where I felt like the coloring was like surprisingly flat, and I'm like, you're in this beautiful like wizard college and the colors are flat. Like, what's going on? But then I say that, and then through Dancing Through Life, you've got that like rotating clock structure. And this movie was a Wicked director with John Chu. John Chu worked on a lot of the Step Up movies, that like sort of dance dramas that came out like over 10-12 years ago.
Oh, that's where he got to start. Cool.
Yeah, at least that's like what I know him from. And those movies always were like super creative with where can you put people to dance? Like where do you film dancing happening? Specifically Step Up 3D, the one that he's most well known for. So I don't know. I think the movie does good things. Oh, he also did Crazy Rich Asians and In the Heights. I didn't realize that. He's been doing stuff for a while. I thought it was overall quite good. I wasn't enamored with it, but I think it's competent at what it's trying to do, which is adapting a very successful musical. That's my political answer for you.
I really, really liked Wicked. I saw it for the first time with domestic partner of the podcast, Amanda, and she adored it. She proceeded to then go see it in the theaters 2 more times, and then we watched it at home on demand video.
So many
Uh,
times.
yeah, so we've listened to the soundtrack a bunch. So she got extremely wicked pilled, and I, by association, have listened to the songs a lot and enjoyed it.
Sorry, she
I
got
think
elixired.
Elixir,
Have
yeah.
you heard about that? Yeah. That's been getting
Is that
wicked
like a
pilled.
thing?
I think listener of the podcast, David. Hi, David. By the way, from our chats nights on the favorite.
Uh,
Their Discord thing says I'm currently wicked pilled, aka elixired, and I think that's so
that's
clever.
funny. That's very good. I think this is like out of the, and I haven't seen many, but out of the adaptations I've seen of Broadway music, like big Broadway musical to film, this feels like the most successful and the most like, yeah, this, it makes sense that you made this into a movie. This alters or elevates or shows me something that I couldn't really see on stage. Um, like, I think the Rent movie is pretty boring. I think Les Mis was not good.
Wow.
Um, Generally, I'm not a huge fan of
Movie
things that
musicals.
were. Yeah, I am a huge fan of movie musicals, um, but not necessarily so often ones that were like the big ticket on Broadway, and now it's a movie. The one exception besides this, of course, being Cats, which was amazing.
Of
The
course.
Cats movie's great. But
Wait, sorry,
they
hold on. You don't get me like that. I wasn't looking. Hold on, cats. Okay, fine, I'll allow it.
But I love, like, there's a lot of practical set work in this movie. They built they planted all those flowers that they go over at the beginning of the movie. So there's so much craft that goes into this. It kind of has that quality of the Lord of the Rings movies, in the sense that they knew that they were going to make multiple, and they knew that they had the money to really like do it. So they did it. And I think in that way, this movie is quite the accomplishment. Cynthia Erivo is amazing in it. She brings like a depth and a nuance and a charm to the role of Elphaba that is astounding. When I saw it in theaters, and The Wizard and I, when it reached the climax and she's like, Wizard and
Yeah.
I, arms wide, people just started clapping. And it's like, we're watching a movie, guys. We don't need to be clapping right now. They hadn't clapped to any other songs, but just the strength of her performance and the pathos that she brings to it, people were like, fuck, I mean, I gotta
I have
clap.
to.
I have to do that. And Alan Sepinwall, I think it was, said, I think this was on Bluesky, had a great point about Erivo's performance, which is like, you don't realize until Defying Gravity that she was restraining herself this whole time.
Exactly.
She was like great, and you're like, wow, she's amazing. But she was holding it back so that Ariana Grande could do the Glinda stuff and have her moments, and they could be kind of on the same level. And then Defying Gravity happens, and she fucking busts the doors wide open. You're like, oh my God.
You were holding all of that back? Yeah.
What a fucking performance. And it takes this moment that could be incredibly corny of her like flying around, and turns it into this triumphant, amazing conclusion to the film.
Yeah.
So there's just a lot that went right here, when so often it's like impossible to make movies. There's so many things you have to do well.
That's true. It's true.
And so many things went right here that I think it's great. I as a whole, I'm not like, that was the best movie I saw this year.
Mhm.
It's kind of like equal to the sum of its parts, as opposed to greater than them, because I think you can still see the parts and see how the parts are operating,
Yeah.
but it has some really good parts.
Yeah, that's a really good, and again, kind of like a politically level-headed way to phrase it is like,
Mhm.
it does come together and all the parts are good. It just so happens that like Not every movie gets to do this many things. This movie gets to have like the biggest marketing campaign we've seen in cinema in years, and it's based on like one of the most successful musicals. It has everything going for it. Of course it's good. You know, it's base level good. It's the parts where it's great, right? It's the shiz dance scene that I'm like, whoa, this is like astoundingly good. It's the back half of Defying Gravity, where I'm like, whoa, it's the anticipation of what's going to happen in part 2, you know, getting to see a unleashed Elphaba, you know, out and about, being who she is. All that stuff, like the hints at what's coming. I think it's been a fun movie for people to hyperfixate on. I loved, to a certain point, the weeks and weeks of people being like, did you notice that Fiyero holds his hands like the Scarecrow in that one shot? That, and it's like, yeah, because when people make movies, they think about those things. Like, it's not... people, and I'm doing the thing where I talk about the reaction more than I'm talking about the movie, but people are really trying to like not cinema sins, but like find like every Easter egg you missed in Wicked, and it's like, yeah, because it's a movie that had a huge budget, and of course they filled it full of Easter eggs because that's what it is. It's a movie about Easter eggs. Like, I don't think its goal is to just be like, look, we like Dorothy's in the background of that one shot. They've already cast Dorothy for part 2. I'm excited to see her. Shout outs to my girl, but like, I don't know. I don't think the movie is like brilliant, thought-provoking high art. I think it's very good at what it's trying to do. I think it's full of talent. It's full of heart and ambition, and it is a display of something that we can still make in the movies these days, and that's an accomplishment. Say what you will about it.
Yeah, and I think another thing about it that is to be recognized but also lauded is like with the Lord of the Rings comparison, those 3 movies, they're an adaptation of like a very well-known popular work of fiction. There's a lot to draw from, but the books were not movies. They weren't scripts. Like, they had to kind of coax films out of that and cut a lot of stuff out and do all of this, like hiking through New Zealand and just kind of like make a movie of it and hope that it came together. Whereas with Wicked, something to recognize is they had the luxury of, it was already a script. It was already a thing that you could just kind of like take off the stage and plop into a film.
Correct.
And then they expanded it and filled in new stuff. And I think the thing to be admired about the film is like, you can really make something a lot worse by doing that, by taking a thing that was like this tight, beloved, complete story and doing the thing that they did with like the Harry Potter movies with the 7th one, where they were like, we're going to do 2. And it's kind of like, well, why? You didn't need to do this. You could have just been more disciplined about editing it down and making it 1. But this
movies
film
are becoming
like,
TV and TV's becoming movies. Sorry, to your original point.
Yeah. And this movie, I think, does kind of the impossible thing of saying, we're going to take the first half of a Broadway musical and double it, and you're going to watch it. And we're going to add in like little side characters who crack sarcastic jokes, like the Bowen Yang character. And we're going to make some of the songs longer. And for the most part, I walk away being like, thank you. You made it better. That was actually really fun. I had a great time. And that's great. And, you know, you've got Stephen Schwartz coming back and like revisiting this work of his and enriching it instead of doing the George Lucas thing of like, I actually always wanted there to be like big sloppy dinosaurs in the background of the scene. And you're like, they didn't need to be here. Like, I think it's actually made better by kind
the
of
additions. I do agree with
the
that.
additions. So that particular form of adaptation is something you don't see in the movies too often. And I think you very rarely see it make the thing better. And I went into it being like, this is going to be so stupid. They're doing 2 Wicked movies. That's so fucking dumb. And I walked out of it like completely eating crow. I was wrong about it. So
the thing about it being 2 parts that's also brilliant, I think they intended it, this has to be intended, is it gives people a year to think about the ending, first of all, and be like, well, what's going to happen to Elphaba? Whereas in the musical, that's like an act break. It's just like, okay, come, lights go down, lights come up. We're back. We're rolling into it. and it gives people time to like engage with the story a little more, like read the book. Or
Mhm.
my biggest annoyance when something gets adapted to a movie and they don't adapt the whole thing is that now book readers get to be like, just wait, guys, because you keep seeing people online who overanalyze this movie and go like, wait, but how does she how is she gonna melt? And they're like, you wait, guys, they're gonna answer that shit in 1 year. Or like, how is that?
Mhm.
How is Dorothy gonna? It's like I read the book, guys. Guys, you're talking about Wicked. Are you kidding? Well, be for real. It's not that deep.
Mhm.
Fiero's gonna become the Scarecrow. That's not a spoiler. That's just the plot of the story. It's not cool.
Mhm.
So I know, I know it's not obnoxious for me, but I think that them breaking it out like that gives people time to sort of think about what's going to happen and theorize and hype up, even though we do know everything that happens in part two.
Right.
You gotta
Yeah, and
remember that there's
it's kind
kids
of
watching
this.
this. There's literal children who don't know that there's a book, and they're like, "Oh, what's gonna happen to Elphaba?" And that's great. I want them to have that.
Yeah. What and it's not even because the book is like so different that even if you went and read the book, I don't think you would know what happens in the second half of Wicked
Yeah.
necessarily. Like you might know the broad strokes of it, but you could go and find a recording of the second act of Wicked, the musical, and it's going to take you what, an hour to, like, you could just finish the story and know what happens. So there is like this fascinating risky tightrope choice they're making of, okay, you're giving everybody a year to get their takes ready and decide if you like properly did it different enough.
Yeah.
Like, did you make it worth our wait? So I'm curious to see what they choose to do with the second half, if they choose to like actually change parts of it or reinterpret parts of it, if they're just going to like do a straight up adaptation of the second half, and then is that going to feel satisfying or not? Because this
Hmm.
half also benefits from like you get to do all the fun stuff and all the kind of like get her to become the witch and now we're going to leave on a cliffhanger, and then can you deliver on that? I don't know, but it's interesting.
We'll see. We'll be back here in November
We shall
talking
see.
about Wicked for good.
So those are the best picture nominees. um if you had to pick, how would you pick and what would you pick
For Best
as the best
Picture,
picture? Hmm.
I always try to make an Alan pick and then a realistic, like if I was a gambling man
Okay.
pick.
Yeah.
So the Alan pick for Best Picture.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's Conclave. I think it has to be
Okay.
Conclave. It's
Okay.
it's a really close tie for me between that and Nickel Boys, but I think where Conclave wins out for me is I like a movie where at the end of the day I fully get what's going on. Like I saw the vision and I appreciated it. Nickel Boys to me literarily worked more because it's smarter than I am. It's more poetic than the
Mm,
way I think than I was thinking about it. I missed details. I
mm,
was like, man, I really want to think more about this movie and I want to rewatch it. But like front to back, Conclave is a movie that I appreciated for what it was trying to do, what's on the screen, what its intentions were, how it looks. I think it is a complete picture of a fantastic movie, and it is my
mhm.
personal pick for Best Picture. That's how I answer that question.
Very cool.
What about
So
you?
you think Nickel Boys is going to win? Is your guess?
No, I sorry. The third pick is what do I actually think is going to win is I really hope it's Conclave. I think Conclave does have an earnest shot. I think it's
Mm,
probably going to be The Brutalist.
mm,
I think that movie is so Oscar-y, which
yeah.
bums me out. But maybe I'm wrong. I would like to be wrong. If it's Wicked, amazing. I'm gonna the doors are gonna blow off. The musical fans are gonna be so annoying for a year.
Uh huh.
I don't think it will be, especially because it's a
Yeah.
part one. Um,
Yeah.
I definitely don't think it's going to be Nickel Boys, although that would make my heart swell. It's not going to be I'm Still Here. They don't. Foreign films have such a hard time getting Best Pictures. It
Hmm.
shouldn't be Emilia Pérez. That would make me and everyone angry. It's not going to be Dune Part 2. It's gonna get like so many awards, but it's not going to get BP. It's not going to be a complete unknown. So I think it's like Conclave and then it's not going to be Anora for sure. So it's Conclave or The Brutalist for me for actual pick.
Mm. Um. Yeah. So I was checking the Golden Globes. I don't know
Oh,
how
yeah.
often the Golden Globes are a good predictor of who wins the Oscar, but they split it off into there's a drama best picture and a musical or comedy best picture.
Nice.
The winner for drama was The Brutalist,
Mm-hmm.
and the winner for musical or comedy was Emilia Pérez. So
Ugh.
I don't know. If I was a betting man, I would say The Brutalist,
Yeah.
probably. For me, I also am kind of two minds about what my best picture is. Um, I think if I'm making a statement about like what I want best picture to mean, I
Mm-hmm.
would pick The Substance, because to me that's a film
Yeah.
that's like it it's like I have a thing to say and I can only say this thing in the media of film.
Yeah.
Like The Substance just doesn't exist in any other form except as a movie, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um and I think it has so much to say about movies, about media. It contains many different tones. It's like an accomplishment of cinematography, of acting, of the effects work, of like there's stuff happening on the
Yeah.
screen.
Gross
Oh my
shit.
god.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um yeah, so to me, if The Substance would win, if you can look at a best picture list and say like this was the movie that was the best that we did this year, I would feel really good about the process that led to that decision. Um and I think it's a movie that also is reflective of like themes of the times and
Right.
is an encapsulation of a lot of the ideas and themes we talked about. It's about hope, it's about the body, it's about the world that we're in, and like kind of the ways that our dreams have failed us and that kind of thing. But if I had to be honest about which of these films I felt the greatest personal connection to and affection for, I think it's Anora. Um,
Wow.
and to me, Anora feels like a best picture. Like honestly, in my opinion, the only thing that is getting in the way is there's a lot of people having sex in that movie. And that is, I don't know if that's disqualifying, but then Oppenheimer had his dick out when he was talking about like I'm destroying worlds or whatever. So maybe we're fine with it. Maybe we could win best picture that way.
Yeah.
Uh, but if I'm kind of thinking about like a great best picture is ultimately a very human story, and that seems to be what people want out of a best picture, um, and out of movies that tend to get nominated and tend to win. Uh, so in some ways, Honora is kind of has Oscar Beatty qualities,
Yeah.
but then in a lot of ways is like it is very much kind of its own thing, and the Armenian guys are part of it, and I love that. So The Substance is kind of like my like bold take answer, and then I
Yeah.
think my honest answer of what I ended up loving the most was Honora.
Wow. Those are really good picks,
Yeah,
dude.
thanks.
Yeah, I think Anora for me is the most rewatchable also. Like I would
Yeah,
I would run that
yeah.
back tomorrow if you told me, let's watch another movie.
Yeah, and I think another important when I think about like what would I pick as best picture, there's kind of a part of me that feels like it's a movie I should be able to tell anybody that they should watch.
Yeah.
And like I think about like Parasite, right? Where Parasite has a lot of things about it that are truly upsetting and off-putting and difficult to engage with,
Yeah.
but there is not a person who I wouldn't feel comfortable saying like if you watched Parasite, you would get something from it. And if you can sort of set aside like people's squeamishness or feelings about sex in film, I feel like I could recommend Honora to anybody. Whereas The Substance, like you can't set aside the upsetting, uncomfortable things because that is what the movie is.
Right.
and I had a very hard time engaging with it because like I don't like those kinds of movies.
Mhm.
So it's harder for me to feel like that is sort of like the crowd pleaser, like everybody can access this and watch it kind of movie.
Yeah.
So, but anyway,
More people should watch these movies. All the ones that we discussed, at least.
this was a good group.
Yeah. It's a weird
Yeah.
group. It's a really weird group. You know,
Yep.
people talk about this point too of like, were the movies good this year? Were the picks good? Or am I going to think about some of these movies years down the line? And like, to my original point on how they pick best pictures, I think that it's a really good wide swath of movies. You've got your, you know, sad stories of injustice. You've got your queer narratives. You've got your musicals. You've got your populist action films. You've got, you know, focusing on a specific person's type of lived experience. You got the tragedy of the American dream. It's all there. You know, they covered everything. And then you got your sort of our political moment in Conclave. Like you've got a little bit of all of that. So yeah, I think it's a good swath. I don't know if everyone agrees with that, but it sounds like we both got a lot out of the ones that we did watch.
100%. Well, thanks for listening to our this episode of Chatz, a movie podcast. Next time we're gonna go back to watching television, and we're gonna be watching freaking Star Trek.
Yay!
Okay, we are watching the second half of season 4 of Deep Space Nine.
Yeah.
So we are starting at episode 14, Return to Grace, and then we are ending at the 26th episode of the season, Broken Link. So join us for that discussion.
I'm excited. Trick Chats returns. I'll be watching Star Trek this weekend. In fact, I'm gonna get the jump on.
Yeah. Alan, where can people find you on the internet?
You can hear me on a couple other podcasts, primarily on scanlinemedia.com on their podcasts, The Creature Core, where my friend Six and I play through Pokemon and talk about it. Yeah, I was just going back to yesterday, listening to the first ever episode of that podcast and being like, all right, and starting it off, Pokemon number 1, Bulbasaur. What do you think of Bulbasaur 6? And like, we were so much younger back then. That podcast has gone through so many iterations and things. That was 2019, which is wacky. So you can listen to me on that. Right now we're playing through Black and White 2, having a great time, almost done with it. And then I'm on the Garnet Wager, which just recently had a new episode released, believe it or not. Finally, the Garnet Wager came back. That's a Korean game show discussion pod. Yeah, woo indeed. And then every other month I either co-host / produce or host Talking Marketing, which is a bi-monthly marketing podcast I do with the American Marketing Association's Boston chapter. And we just recorded an episode yesterday, so I co-hosted that one, and it was a lot of fun. You can hear that on amaboston.org or wherever you listen to podcasts. And last but not least, I'm on Bluesky. I always forget to mention aibrahim.bsky.social. I need to post more. I must post. I'm too busy living my life to post.
Post.
Yep. What about you?
You can find me on another podcast with my friend Justin, Super Smash Echoes, where we play video games related to the Super Smash Brothers franchise. You can also find me some of my writing on notthatmagellan.substack.com and find me on notthatmagellan.bsky.social. If you want to get in touch with the show, you can do that in a few ways. You can email us at chatzpod@gmail.com with questions, comments, concerns, suggestions, things that you want us to read on the show. That is chatzpod@gmail.com. We are also chatzpod.bsky.social on Bluesky. We have a website, chatzpod.com, where you can find links to first episodes of different seasons if you want to jump into our coverage at different points and that kind of thing. You can also find our episodes on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm wearing a Dune shirt.
Oh, you are wearing a Dune shirt. Wow.
I planned that. Surf Bacchus.
I love that. I'm wearing this is Conclave themed.
I love it.
It's not true. Yeah, it's just a cloak. You can also support us financially on Patreon at patreon.com/chatspod. For $1 a month, you get on our Discord. For $3 a month, you get twice monthly bonus content. So last month, that was us talking about one of the Discworld books and us watching Pirates of the Caribbean. That's right. That's the other thing we did.
Yeah.
$5 a month gets you thanked here at the end of every episode. So thank you to domestic partner of the podcast, Amanda, Arthur, Emily, Emrys, Felicia, Jen, Justin, Kyrie, Lee, Marcus, May-Louise, my mom, Nick of the Brothers at Infinite War, Noel, Six, and Stefan. Thank you, folks, for supporting the show. Thank you also to Camilla at Camillastrator for our podcast art. Alan, we just spent a few hours talking about movies we loved, so that might have felt chatsum-y to the people. But let's give them one more. A suggestion between now and next time, a chatsum for them to snack on.
Yeah, I was just realizing a couple seconds ago that us doing this prohibits me technically from being like, my chatsum is Anora. I'm like, damn. Okay, my chatsum is Nickel Boys. Well, damn. We just talked about that for 3 hours.
You could do that if you want to.
I'm going to fix it
above.
up. Yeah, see, my chatsum is look up. Dig up, stupid. Little Simpsons for y'all. No, my chatsum is a new album I just listened to earlier this month. I'm a really big fan of Wafia. Wafia is an Australian Syrian singer who does wonderful music. I got to see her live in New York maybe 3 years ago. And she hasn't really gone like super huge yet. I actually had a listener reach out yesterday and they were like, you guys chat some Doechii right before she went huge. And I was like, I didn't say this. I was like, to be fair, there were like black women on my Bluesky feed telling me about Doechii for months and I wasn't listening because I'm stupid. And then I was like, I think Doechii's good. And then she blew up and everyone's like, wow, Alan's such a tastemaker. I take no claim in that. She was around before I shouted her out.
That's really
funny. I will stake my claim in Wafia. I've talked about her music before, but her new album Promised Land is such a vibe. It's so beautiful. She's clearly had like a lot of like love stuff happen to her in the last couple of years, and figuring out what kind of love she wants in the world. And the two songs off of it that I absolutely adore are Distant, which is really relevant to where I've been at lately, talking about like wanting to love somebody but being afraid to how much you can express yourself, how much you can admit to them about things. If I seem cold and distant, that doesn't mean I don't love you. And then Crystal Ball is such a clever song. It's one of the singles, and it's like, about like if you gave me a crystal ball and told me I could find out who I was going to be with and what my fate was, I wouldn't want to know. Because I want to know how a heart breaks, how like I want to experience the life that leads to that conclusion, don't just tell me, oh, you're going to end up with this guy. So Promised Land by Wafia has some really clever lyrical stuff, and it's a beautiful, very relaxing listen. I highly recommend it. What about you,
Great. So we talked about, as I mentioned, the first Discworld book on our Patreon recently. We listened to the first section of the very first book, which is called The Color of Magic. And that discussion inspired me like, oh, I really like the part of the book that we read. I want to check out, find a different entry point into the Discworld, expanded series. And I ended up picking a book that's in kind of a sub-series of books about the introduction of new technologies into the Discworld society, and specifically this character named Moist von Lipwick, Lipwick, who gets kind of, what's the word? He gets like kind of caught up in the power structures of that change. So there's a book called Going Postal, where essentially Moist is a con man who's kind of like sentenced to the death penalty, and then the patriarch of the city kind of pulls him out of that, and he's like, hey, I could save you from being executed. You need to go work for me and run the post office. And Moist is like, what? All right. This is weird. And then over the course of the book, what ends up happening is this guy who, had always gotten his thrills out of like tricking people, but at the core of it, there's this deep kind of interest in people and like an expertise in how to manipulate them, because he's ultimately a very empathetic person. And that ends up leading him to like champion this life of civil service and revive the post office and get into this big titanic conflict with this cabal of capitalists who've captured the like telegraph towers and are preying on people and running those towers into the ground to the point that they're like breaking down just for the sake of profit. And it's this really great story about like, you know, the difference between being a kind of like confidence man, con man, and being a kind of like billionaire con man, and just the ethics of profit and like trying to make your way in the world. And it's also about the beauty of being a civil servant and like civil services like the post office. It's really funny and thoughtful, and I really enjoyed it. So Going Postal. And then I'm now listening to its like kind of sequel book, Making Money, where now Moist has to run the bank. Uh-oh, how's that gonna
Oh,
go? But yeah, I really enjoyed it.
I am looking at. Oh, there's two different versions on Libby because I just finished The Secret History on my Spotify and
Mhm.
I don't want to bump into my audiobook listening. We talked about that again on the Chats nights. How much it sucks
Oh god,
ass.
that happened to me. It sucks. Yeah.
It's such a bad feeling because it's just like a wall. They're just like, you're done. You're like, I was in the middle of something. They're like, no, you're done for the month. Fuck
Yeah.
you,
So
Spotify.
stupid.
Yeah, but that's on Libby. I'm gonna check it out. Sub Chatzum for the app Libby if you want to listen to audiobooks and read ebooks from your
Hell
local
yeah.
library.
Hell yeah. Uh,
Groovy, Majon. Yeah,
that brings us to the end of this episode of Chats. Thank you for
yeah.
listening, and we'll see you at the movies.
Ooh. Bye bye.